Hello beautiful people. Welcome to Gringotts Hub. In today's episode, we explore, what if Harry used the Potter-Black-Peverell-Merlin rings to strip both Dumbledore and Voldemort of their magic at once? Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Weight of Names. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Harry had always thought was the most forgettable day of the week. Nothing important ever happened on a Tuesday. Wars didn't start on Tuesdays. People didn't fall in love on Tuesdays. Tuesdays were for leftover meals and half-finished homework and the particular brand of grey English sky that couldn't even commit to raining properly. So of course it arrived on a Tuesday. He almost missed it entirely. He'd been sitting at the narrow desk in his room at number 4 Privet Drive, nominally reading a Transfiguration text but actually watching a pigeon on the windowsill with the detached interest of someone who had run out of more interesting things to think about. The pigeon left. The owl arrived. It was not Hedwig. Hedwig was out hunting, probably disgusted with him for sleeping until noon, but a Gringotts owl, sleek and businesslike, with the faint smell of old coin and goblin magic that clung to everything that came from that building. The envelope was heavy. Not thick heavy, but dense heavy, the way old things are heavy, like the weight was coming from somewhere deeper than paper and ink. His name on the front was written in a script he didn't recognize, not the scratchy cursive of most wizarding correspondence, but something older, each letter slightly too precise, like it had been carved rather than written. Mr. Harrison James Potter-Black. He stared at that for a long moment. Not Harry Potter. Not even Harry James Potter. Harrison. And the hyphenated Black, sitting there like it had always been part of his name and he'd simply never been told. He opened it standing up, which in retrospect felt right. The letter inside was from a goblin named Ragnarok, who identified himself as senior account manager for the Potter, Black, and associated estates. The language was formal to the point of near incomprehensibility, but Harry had spent enough time in Hermione's orbit that he could parse dense text when he needed to. The core of it, stripped of the legal scaffolding, was this: Sirius Black had not, in the eyes of Gringotts, died. He had passed through a veil of ancient magical classification that Gringotts recognized as a suspended mortality event, which meant his estate had entered a period of probationary inheritance. Harry, as Sirius's named heir and last living blood proximate claimant through the Black family's secondary adoption clauses, had been flagged for a mandatory inheritance audit. Mandatory, the letter stressed, twice. Goblins did not stress things twice unless they meant them very seriously indeed. There was a time at the bottom, 9 a.m., Thursday. This Thursday. 2 days away. Harry read it again. Then he sat down, very slowly, on the edge of his bed, and thought about what suspended mortality event might mean in practical terms. He thought about the veil in the Department of Mysteries, the way Sirius had fallen through it with that expression of almost surprise on his face, the way Remus had grabbed Harry and pulled him back. He thought about how grief had sat in him for months like a stone-swallowed whole, too large to move and too present to ignore. Then he thought about 2 words, not died. He was out of his chair and writing to Hermione before the thought had fully finished forming. Hermione met him outside Gringotts at 8:53 on Thursday morning. She had taken the Fleur to the Leaky Cauldron and was waiting on the steps of the bank with her bag over one shoulder and a look on her face that he recognized as her "this is serious and I've already researched it" expression, which was subtly different from her regular serious expression in ways he'd learned to read over 5 years. I found references to suspended mortality events in treatises on ancient magical thresholds, she said, by way of hello. It's extremely rare. The veil isn't a killing instrument. It's a boundary marker between states of existence. It's more like, Harry, it's more like a magical coma than a death. The person passes through and their magic goes dormant, but they're not gone. Gringotts recognizes it because the magic still registers on their estate instruments. So he's alive, Harry said. He's somewhere, Hermione said, with the careful precision of someone who wants to be honest and hopeful at the same time. Which is more than we knew before. Harry nodded once and pushed open the bank's bronze doors. Ragnarok was not what Harry expected. Most of the goblins he'd dealt with at Gringotts had the harried, subtly contemptuous air of bank tellers who would rather be doing literally anything else. Ragnarok was different. He was older, for one thing, his face was a map of deep lines, and his eyes were the particular amber-black of very old amber, with something watchful and assessing moving behind them. He greeted Harry not with the usual grudging nod but with a slight incline of the head that felt deliberate, like a formal acknowledgement. "Mr. Potter-Black," he said. "I am pleased you came promptly. There is significant business to discuss." "The letter mentioned an inheritance audit," Harry said, taking the chair across from Ragnarok's desk. Hermione sat beside him, her quill already in hand. Harry had stopped being quietly embarrassed by this years ago. "What does that actually mean?" "It means," Ragnarok said, opening a ledger the size of a paving stone, "that we must establish what you are, before we can establish what you are owed." There was a silence. Harry glanced at Hermione. She had stopped writing. "What I am," Harry repeated. "Your birth certificate, as registered with both the Ministry and with Gringotts, names you Harry James Potter, son of James Charles Potter and Lily Rose Potter née Evans." Ragnarok turned a page. "This is accurate but incomplete. The Potter line, as you may know, traces direct descent from Ignotus Peverell. The youngest of the three brothers," Hermione said, almost involuntarily. "Correct. The Peverell family's magical lineage is one of the oldest surviving in Britain. The Potter inheritance, therefore, carries Peverell blood and Peverell magical rights." Another page. "The Black family's inheritance is similarly ancient. Sirius Black named you his heir in a document filed with Gringotts 17 months before his passage through the veil. This is legally and magically binding. You are, therefore, heir to both the Potter and Black estates." "I knew most of that," Harry said. "The letter mentioned associated estates." Ragnarok's amber eyes moved to him with something that might, in a goblin, have been appreciation. "The audit process requires us to trace all associated magical bloodlines. When we ran your inheritance matrix, a standard procedure involving a small sample of your blood and our estate instruments, we encountered 2 additional flags." He paused. "The first was Peverell, which we expected. The second was not." He reached under his desk and produced a flat stone disc, about the size of a dinner plate, covered in carved runes that shifted slowly like they were breathing. He pressed Harry's hand to it without asking first, and Harry let him. The stone was warm, almost body temperature, and the runes under his palm moved toward him like they were curious. The disc glowed. Not gently. Not subtly. It went from carved stone to white-hot in about 3 seconds, and Ragnarok pulled Harry's hand back with surprising swiftness and stared at the disc with an expression Harry couldn't read. "The second flag," Ragnarok said, his voice for the first time slightly different, lower, more careful, "is Merlin." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. "Merlin," Harry said. "Yes. As in, there is only one Merlin in the historical record," Ragnarok said dryly. "Yes. That one." Hermione made a sound that was almost a word and then wasn't. Harry looked at her. She had her hand pressed flat against the desk as if steadying herself. "How is that possible?" Harry asked. Not disbelievingly, he had stopped disbelieving things about his family history 2 minutes ago, but genuinely wanting to understand. "Merlin's bloodline did not end," Ragnarok said, turning pages in the ledger with the calm of someone who had had strange conversations in this office before. "It fragmented. Spread across families over centuries, becoming increasingly dilute until the inheritance instruments could no longer identify it clearly. Your maternal bloodline, the Evans line, carries what we believe is the terminal concentration of Merlin's magical heredity. Your mother's magic was extraordinary, Mr. Potter. More extraordinary than even she knew. Muggle-born, yes, but the Muggle-born designation as applied by the Ministry is a crude instrument. Magic surfaces where it will." Harry was very still. "My mother was a descendant of Merlin." "Distantly, yes. But your combined inheritance, Potter, Black, Peverell through the paternal line, and Merlin through the maternal, creates what our instruments recognize as a full convergence. For bloodlines, each ancient, each extraordinary, united for the first time in recorded history in a single living magical being. Ragnarok closed the ledger. You, Mr. Potter, are, for lack of a more precise term, everything. The vault was deeper than any Harry had been to before. Not the dramatic plunging depths of the high-security vaults, but a different quality of deep, the kind that comes from age rather than architecture. The cart ride took 20 minutes at least, and the air changed as they descended, growing not colder but older, if old air was a thing, which Harry was starting to think it might be. The vault door was not a door. It was a wall of the same rune-carved stone as the disc in Ragnarok's office, floor to ceiling, with no visible handle or hinge. Ragnarok stood back and looked at Harry expectantly. "Does it need blood?" Harry asked. "It needs you," Ragnarok said. "Place both hands on the stone. All of you, don't hold anything back." Harry had spent 5 years holding things back. Holding back his anger, his fear, his magic when it surged in moments of high emotion, and he knew it would unsettle people. He had become expert at it the way children who grow up in houses with too many rules become expert at occupying as little space as possible. He pressed both hands to the stone wall and, deliberately, consciously, stopped holding back. It was like opening a door in his chest that had always been locked. The stone didn't glow this time. It sang, a low, resonant sound that Harry felt more in his sternum than his ears, and the runes didn't shift, they cascaded, pouring down the face of the stone like water, and the wall simply ceased to exist. What was behind it was not what he expected. No gold. No jewels stacked to the ceiling. No overflowing trunks of wizarding wealth. The chamber was small, lit by a sourceless amber light, and in the center of a stone plinth sat a plain wooden box, the size of a shoebox, sealed with 4 locks of 4 different materials, iron, gold, wood, and what looked like pure black glass. And beside the box, a letter. Not in the formal script of Gringotts correspondence. In handwriting Harry knew with the absolute cellular certainty of someone who had spent years staring at a Hogwarts letter, a signed chocolate frog card, and the back of a photograph. His mother's handwriting. Lily Potter's handwriting, dated from a week before Halloween 1981. His hands were not entirely steady when he picked it up. He read it there, in the vault, with Hermione standing a respectful 3 paces back and Ragnarok waiting outside the door. He read it twice. Then he folded it very carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, closest to his chest. His mother had known. Not everything, she hadn't known about the convergence, hadn't used that word, but she had known enough. She had known the Evans line carried something old and strange. She had known that she and James together had created something the world didn't quite have a category for. She had suspected Dumbledore knew more than he said. She had written, "If you find this vault, my darling, it means you've lived long enough to need it. Don't let anyone tell you what to do with what's inside. It belongs to you. It was always yours." He opened the box. The 4 locks responded to the 4 aspects of him without any instruction, the iron to the Potter blood, the gold to the Black inheritance, the wood to the Peverell legacy, and the black glass to something that went through his hands like a current, sharp and electric and ancient. Inside the box were 4 rings. Not gaudy, not over-designed. Simpler than he expected. The first was plain silver with a small Potter crest worked into the flat face. The second was black metal, goblin wrought, he could tell by the weight, with the Black family crest, the 3 stars in a chevron. The third was bone white, and the Deathly Hallows symbol was cut into it with mathematical precision, the circle and line and triangle nested perfectly inside each other. The fourth was bronze, the oldest looking of the 4, and the symbol worked into its face was one Harry didn't recognize, a complex interlocking series of lines that managed to suggest both a circle and a flame without being clearly either. He knew without being told that the bronze ring was Merlin's. He picked up the silver ring first, and the moment his fingers closed around it, the magic hit him like stepping out of a door into a gale. Not a gale that knocked him back, one that found him, specifically, and pressed against him the way a recognition presses, like greeting something that has been waiting. The ring slid onto his right index finger as if it had been made to that exact measurement. The black ring went on his right middle finger. The Peverell ring, Peverell bone white and so light it barely existed, went on his right ring finger. The bronze ring, Merlin's ring, he held for almost a full minute before putting it on, because he could feel what was inside it even through the gap of air between metal and skin, and it was large. Not large like a room is large, but large like a sky is large. Patient and immense and very, very old. He put it on his right little finger. For a moment, nothing. Then the four magics found each other, and Harry Potter sat down on the floor of his ancestor's vault because his legs had simply made the executive decision that standing was no longer the priority. It wasn't painful. He would say that clearly later, to Hermione, who asked with the focused concern of someone cataloging symptoms. It wasn't painful. It was more like, he tried to find the word and kept arriving at revelation. As if he'd been seeing the world through a slightly wrong prescription his whole life and someone had just handed him the correct lenses. The vault around him was suddenly legible in a way he couldn't quite explain. He could feel the age in the stones, the intentions in the carved runes, the specific magical signatures of the four bloodlines that had deposited power into this place over centuries. He could feel Hermione behind him like a warm, bright, specific flame. He could feel Ragnarok at the door, older magic, different magic, goblin magic that had its own dignity and integrity. He could feel the bank above them, the city above that, and further up, like a bruise he hadn't known was there, the faint but identifiable signature of a magic that was cold and deliberate and obsessively singular. Voldemort. Somewhere north and east, not moving. Just, there. Pulsing like a bad tooth. And further still, in a direction that wasn't quite north or east or any compass point but was unmistakably there, the magic of Albus Dumbledore. Old, powerful, extraordinarily subtle, and arranged, Harry realized with a coldness that spread from his chest outward, in patterns that were specifically oriented around him. Not protecting him. Not watching for his safety. Arranged. Like scaffolding around a building under construction, or like the frame of a cage built with loving care. He sat on the floor of the vault for another few seconds. Then he stood up. "I need the contents of all four estates," he said to Ragnarok, who appeared in the doorway. "Full inventory. Full access. Whatever assets, properties, vaults, and," he paused, "protections are associated with all four bloodlines." Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment with those amber-black eyes. "That is a significant request. The process typically takes several weeks." "I'd like to start today," Harry said. "And I'd like to know everything Gringotts knows about magic stripping rituals, ancestral binding rites, and the specific capabilities of convergence inheritance." He glanced at the four rings on his hand. "I have a feeling we're going to need to move quickly." Ragnarok's expression didn't change, but something in those old eyes shifted. "As you wish, Mr. Potter-Black." A pause. "Shall I have tea brought to the conference room?" "Please," Harry said. They were in the Gringotts conference room, marble table, low amber lamps, a tea service that was probably older than the Ministry of Magic, for 4 hours. Hermione had filled 12 feet of parchment by the end of it. Not with notes, exactly, with a web of information, cross-referenced and annotated in her increasingly small handwriting as the hours passed, each new piece of information finding its connection to 3 others and demanding a line drawn between them. She had questions that Harry couldn't always follow and several that Ragnarok visibly respected, which meant they were good questions. The short version of what they learned was this: the 4 rings were not just symbols of inheritance. They were instruments, created at different points in history by members of each bloodline for specific purposes. The Potter ring was a binding focus, it concentrated magical intent and sharpened it to an almost surgical precision. The black ring was a severing tool, historically used in the Black family's darker magical practices. It could sever magical connections, bindings, and in extreme cases, magical channels themselves. The Peverell ring was a threshold key. It manipulated the boundary between states of magical existence, the same principle the veil worked on, but with control rather than finality. And the Merlin ring was, Ragnarok described it with more care than he'd used for anything else, an amplifier of will. Merlin's magic had not been rooted in technique or knowledge or even raw power, but in the absolute conviction of intent. The ring took that principle and rendered it as an instrument. Used separately, each ring was remarkable. Used together, by someone who carried all 4 bloodlines, they theoretically could do something that had no precedent in recorded magical history. They could strip a witch or wizard of their magic, Hermione said, not looking up from her parchment. Completely and permanently. That is the theoretical application, yes, Ragnarok said. Has it ever been done? Not with all 4 rings. Individual instances of magical stripping exist in historical records, brutal procedures, usually reversible, usually partial. The combined effect of these 4 rings on a convergence heir would be categorically different. He folded his hands on the table. It would be total and it would be irreversible. The stripped individual would retain their intelligence, their memories, their physical capabilities. They would simply no longer have access to magic. Any magic. Of any kind. Harry had been quiet for most of the last hour. He'd been listening, fitting pieces together, feeling the rings on his hand with the low, constant hum of their presence. He looked up now. What about Horcruxes? He asked. Ragnarok went still. That is a specific question. I'm a specific person, Harry said. The goblin looked at him for a long time. Then, the Peverell ring specifically addresses the question of threshold states, the boundary between living and not living, between existing in one state and another. A Horcrux is, fundamentally, an anchor. It tethers a magical signature to a state of existence. A pause. The Peverell ring, in concert with the others, would not merely strip the magic. It would dissolve the anchors. All of them. Simultaneously. Hermione's quill had stopped moving. She was staring at Ragnarok. So if you used all 4 rings on Voldemort, Harry said slowly, watching the pieces fall into their places with the deliberate satisfaction of something that has been falling for a long time and finally found the floor, you wouldn't need to destroy the Horcruxes first. The stripping would dismantle the Horcrux tethers from the source outward, Ragnarok confirmed. Yes. The room was very quiet. What about the one in me? Harry said. Hermione's breath caught. Ragnarok's amber eyes moved to him with something that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to it. You know about that, Ragnarok said. I've suspected for a while, Harry said. Which wasn't entirely true, he'd known, in the way you know things you haven't let yourself fully look at, for about 8 months. The connection to Voldemort. The way his emotions bleed into my head. The Parseltongue. I didn't exactly volunteer myself for an X-ray, but I'm not stupid. The Peverell ring has already recognized it, Ragnarok said. When you put it on. It identified the foreign magical signature within your own. He met Harry's eyes. The stripping would remove it. The fragment that is not yours would be dissolved along with the others. Your own magic, your actual magic, the convergence inheritance, would remain entirely intact. More than intact. He paused. Cleaner. Harry looked down at the 4 rings on his right hand. The hum they made was not threatening. It wasn't eager, exactly. It was simply present, the way very old certainties are present, not demanding anything, just available, waiting for the hand that already held them to decide where to point. One more question, Harry said. Can they be used on 2 people simultaneously, or does it have to be sequential? Ragnarok blinked. It was the first time Harry had seen him do something that looked genuinely surprised. The theoretical literature does not address that specific, can it be done? Harry said. A long pause. Ragnock turned to a section of the large text he'd had open for most of the last hour, ran a finger down a column of cramped runes, turned a page, and was quiet for almost a full minute. Theoretically, he said finally. It would require extraordinary control. The will of the caster would need to divide and sustain two simultaneous streams of the Merlin amplification while the other three rings maintained their individual functions across both targets. He set the book down. It has never been attempted. The difficulty is not technical. It is psychological. Most magic users cannot sustain that kind of divided, absolute, unswerving intent toward two separate targets at once. The mind fractures. But the rings would support it, if the caster could manage it. Yes. Harry nodded. He picked up his tea, which had gone cold an hour ago, and drank it anyway. Then I think we're done for today, he said. I'll need a full copy of all relevant texts, the complete estate inventories for all 4 bloodlines, and a standing appointment, weekly to start, until we're finished with the audit. He stood up and buttoned his jacket. And Ragnock, I need this to remain entirely within Gringotts. Not a word to the ministry. Not a word to anyone outside this building. Gringotts does not conduct its clients' private affairs for the benefit of the ministry, Ragnock said, with a dry dignity that made it clear Harry had perhaps slightly underestimated how much goblins enjoyed keeping secrets from the ministry. We never have. Good, Harry said. Hermione was still sitting. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before, not the cataloging expression, not the worried expression, not even the impressed expression she'd given him the first time he'd produced a Patronus. This was something quieter and more serious, an expression that recognized something in him that she was still working out how to name. Harry, she said. I know, he said. You're not going to do this halfway, are you? It wasn't quite a question. He looked at the 4 rings on his right hand, 4 circles of different metal that felt, now that they were on, less like additions and more like returns, like parts of himself that had been held in trust by history until he was old enough to carry them. Hermione, he said, I've been doing things halfway my entire life because the people around me needed me to. Needed me manageable. Needed me scared enough to stay in my lane. He looked up at her. I'm 16 years old and 2 of the most powerful wizards alive have spent my entire life either trying to kill me or trying to use me as a weapon, and I have spent all this time playing along because I thought that was the only game in town. He paused. It's not. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her quill and kept writing. Right, she said. Then we'd better plan this properly. Outside the conference room window, the golden lamplight of Diagon Alley was dimming toward evening. Somewhere in the city, people were living their lives with no idea that the boy who'd been the centerpiece of their war for 16 years had just stopped being a piece on anyone's board. Harry Potter walked out of Gringotts with 4 rings on his right hand and a letter from his dead mother in his chest pocket and a decision made so cleanly it felt like it had always already been made. The Tuesday feeling was entirely gone. Chapter 2, What Pawns Don't Do. Sirius Black was not, technically, supposed to be living in a flat above a Muggle bookshop in Edinburgh. This was Dumbledore's assessment of the situation, delivered through a Patronus message 3 weeks after Sirius had clawed his way back through the Vale on a Thursday morning in late June, which Sirius had listened to with the patient expression of a man who has been told what to do by Albus Dumbledore for the better part of 4 decades and has recently decided he is finished with it. He'd sent a Patronus back that said, simply, noted, and then gone back to making toast. The flat was small and warm and smelled of old books rising through the floorboards, which Sirius found he didn't mind at all. He'd spent 12 years in Azkaban and 2 living in a house that hated him. Small and warm was a significant upgrade. He'd furnished it gradually, with the particular pleasure of a man who has never previously had the experience of choosing his own furniture, and the result was eclectic to say the least, a deep leather armchair that had no business being as comfortable as it was, a kitchen table with mismatched chairs, bookshelves that he kept meaning to organize and never did, and on the windowsill, a row of small plants that Remus had brought him without comment and that Sirius watered with the slightly puzzled conscientiousness of someone who has discovered, unexpectedly, that he enjoys keeping things alive. He was in the armchair with a cup of tea and a Quidditch magazine when the fire in the small hearth flared green, and Harry stepped through. Sirius was on his feet before Harry had fully arrived, the armchair scraping back, the magazine hitting the floor. Not out of alarm, the Floo was keyed to Harry and Hermione and Remus and no one else, and anyway he'd been expecting Harry since the owl arrived 2 days ago saying, "Coming Thursday. Bringing Hermione. Have something to tell you." He was on his feet because he'd been on his feet every time Harry came through that fire for 6 weeks, ever since the first time, ever since that impossible morning when he'd come through himself and Harry had been there waiting and neither of them had managed to say anything for a full minute. Harry straightened up from the fire. He looked different. Sirius had been cataloging the differences since Harry started visiting, taller by half an inch, jaw sharper, something in the eyes that had always been there but was now closer to the surface. Tonight there was something else. Something that sat in Harry's spine and in the set of his shoulders that Sirius recognized from exactly one other person, and that person was James Potter, and James had only looked like that when he'd already made a decision and was simply informing the world of the fact. "Hey," Harry said. "Hey," Sirius said. "Hermione coming?" 2 minutes. She stopped to pick up food. "Good. I've got nothing." Sirius sat back down and kicked the footrest into place. "You look like you've decided something." "I have," Harry said. He sat in the chair across from Sirius and held out his right hand. Sirius looked at the 4 rings. He was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and looked more closely, and the silence that followed was a different quality of silence, not empty, but full, the way old magic feels when you're close to it. "Gringotts," Sirius said. "Thursday. The inheritance audit. You knew about it?" "I knew Ragnarok would contact you eventually. I filed the inheritance paperwork from." Sirius made a gesture that encompassed the whole concept of the other side of the veil, "wherever I was. It seemed like the productive use of whatever time I had." He paused. "I didn't know about the Merlin lineage. James and I spent years on the Potter genealogy and we never found that." "How far back does it go?" "Far," Harry said. "Through Mum's side." Sirius was quiet again. "Then, Lily," he said softly, and there was a weight to it, a whole grief pressed into one name. The Floo flared again. Hermione came through with a paper bag that smelled of something good and a folder of notes tucked under her arm, and she handed the food to Sirius, dropped the folder on the table, and sat down with the efficient economy of someone who has a great deal to cover and is going to cover all of it. "We need to talk about what the rings can do," she said. "Specifically the simultaneous application question." They talked for 3 hours. Hermione ran it like a briefing, which neither Harry nor Sirius objected to because she was better at this than either of them. She walked through the ring's individual functions first, then the convergence effect, then the theoretical framework for simultaneous application. She had the Gringotts texts, or the relevant pages. Ragnarok had permitted copies of specific sections, and she referenced them precisely, and she raised every objection she could think of before either of them could raise it for her. It was, Harry thought, her way of arguing against the plan so that she could find the answer to every argument and then be fully committed when she landed on the other side. Sirius listened. He asked questions that were sharper than they sometimes got credit for. Sirius Black had spent years being dismissed as a reckless hothead, and the assessment wasn't entirely wrong, but the rashness had always coexisted with a genuinely quick and lateral mind. He'd been an Aura-level duelist at 17. He'd cracked the Marauder's map enchantments at 15. He pushed on the simultaneous application problem from 3 different angles and Hermione pushed back from 3 others and Harry watched them both and thought about the cold deliberate pulse of Voldemort's magic he'd felt through the rings, and about the scaffolding arrangement of Dumbledore's. "The psychological challenge is the critical piece," Sirius said eventually. "You're not asking whether the magic can do it. You're asking whether Harry can." "I can," Harry said. They both looked at him. "Not arrogantly," he said. "Just, I've been inside both of their heads. Voldemort's been bleeding into my dreams for a year and a half. And Dumbledore, he paused, weighing words, I can feel exactly what his magic is doing around me now. What it's always been doing. The rings showed me. He looked at his hand. Dividing my intent between two targets is hard, but it's not unfamiliar. I've been doing a version of it every day since 4th year, tracking Voldemort's movements in my sleep while trying to function as a normal person during the day. Hermione was making a note. We'd need to practice. Not the stripping, but the divided intent. There are exercises, I know, Harry said. I've been doing them since Friday. She looked up. Harry, it's Thursday. I know. A pause. Sirius made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something else, something that might have been the specific parental pride of a man who had never expected to feel parental pride and was therefore ambushed by it regularly. There's a second problem, Hermione said, putting her quill down with the deliberate action of someone approaching the difficult part. Dumbledore. Yes, Harry said. He's going to notice. He probably already has. You put on 4 ancient convergence rings in a sealed Gringotts vault and he might not know the specifics but he monitors your magical signature. He'll have felt something shift. He's not going to do anything yet, Harry said. He doesn't know what I know. As far as he's concerned, I might have just received an inheritance. He'll want to talk to me. He'll be gentle about it. He'll be warm and a bit vague and he'll ask questions that seem like interest but are actually assessment. He paused. Same as always, basically. Sirius's jaw tightened. Harry, I'm not bitter about it, Harry said, which was partly true and partly a lie he'd told himself enough times that it had developed a reasonable approximation of truth. I understand what he is. He's a man who has been playing a very long game for a very long time and he genuinely believes that the sacrifices he makes, the sacrifices he arranges, are justified by the outcome. He loves me, in his way. I think that's real. He looked at the fire. It doesn't make what he's been doing okay. The room was quiet. What are you going to do about the meeting with him? Hermione asked. Go to it. Let him talk. Show him nothing. Harry looked up. We need time. Ragnarok is compiling the full estate resources, there are properties I didn't know about, protections that come with the bloodlines, things that will matter for what comes after. I need 2, maybe 3 weeks. And Voldemort's movements? Stable, for now. He's consolidating. He won't move on anything major until autumn. The Death Eater network needs rebuilding after the Ministry debacle. Harry paused. We have a window. Hermione closed her folder. She and Sirius exchanged a look over Harry's head, one of those looks that adults sometimes exchange, thinking they're subtle. Harry caught it and said nothing. Right, she said. Then there's one more thing. She pulled a separate sheet of parchment from the back of the folder. I've been thinking about the after. What happens to the wizarding world when Voldemort is neutralized and Dumbledore is simultaneously stripped of his magic? We need to plan for that. The political vacuum alone could be, one thing at a time, Sirius said. No, Hermione said firmly. That's how people make a mess of otherwise good plans. They think about the action and not the consequence. The after matters as much as the before. Harry smiled, just slightly. She's right. Sirius threw up his hands. When is she not? The summons from Dumbledore came on Saturday, delivered by Fawkes in person, which was both impressive and slightly irritating as a method of communication. There was something about having a literal phoenix materialize in your bedroom that made casual indifference difficult to maintain. Harry read the note, tucked it in his pocket, and went back to the exercise he'd been working on since Friday morning. It was not, technically, a spell. It didn't have an incantation. It was more like a discipline, learning to split his magical attention the way you might learn to pat your head and rub your stomach simultaneously, except that the stakes of getting it wrong were somewhat higher and the coordination required was operating at a level that made his temples ache for the first 20 minutes each session. He sat cross-legged on the floor of his room at Privet Drive with both hands resting on his knees and the 4 rings humming their steady hum, and he practiced holding 2 separate, distinct, absolute intentions at once. He used memories as placeholders. For one stream, the memory of Voldemort's voice in the graveyard, that cold smooth sound, the terrible intimacy of "Kill the Spare." For the other, Dumbledore's office, 5th year, the old man sitting behind his desk with that devastatingly careful sorrow, talking about love as a weapon while Harry's heart was still raw from Sirius nearly dying. 2 voices. 2 very specific kinds of harm. He held them both, simultaneously, and pushed the ring's combined hum toward both of them at once. By Saturday afternoon he could sustain it for 4 minutes. He got up, washed his face, put on decent clothes, and went to Hogwarts. It was strange being in the castle in summer. The corridors had a different quality, sound traveled further in the absence of 500 students, and the light that came through the tall windows was long and golden and unhurried, settling on the stone floors like it had nowhere to be. Harry walked through the familiar route to the headmaster's office with his hands in his pockets and his face arranged in what Hermione called his diplomatic expression, which was essentially his normal expression with the irritation pushed below the surface. The gargoyle admitted him without requiring the password. Dumbledore was standing at his window when Harry came in, looking out over the grounds with the serene, thoughtful posture of a man who had been told an interesting pupil was arriving and had arranged himself to appear pleasantly engaged. Every portrait in the office watched Harry with the attentiveness of audience members who know the show is about to get interesting. "Harry," Dumbledore said, turning with a warm smile. "Thank you for coming so promptly. Please, sit." "I'll stand, thanks," Harry said. The warmth in Dumbledore's smile didn't falter, but something behind his eyes adjusted, a subtle recalibration, quick and subtle as a compass needle finding north. "Of course. Can I offer you, what did you want to talk about, Professor?" Harry said pleasantly. Dumbledore tilted his head slightly, the way he did when he was deciding how to approach something. "I wanted to check in on how you're doing. It's been a difficult few months, after everything that happened at the Ministry. I worry about you, Harry." "I'm fine," Harry said. "Never better, actually." Dumbledore moved to his desk and sat, and Harry noted that he did it gradually, taking up his position the way someone positions a piece on a board. "I understand you made a visit to Gringotts this week." "I did," Harry said. "Inheritance audit. Sirius's estate, mainly. Sirius is, well, I'm so pleased that he made his way back to us." A pause. "Remarkable thing, the veil. Ancient magic. We understand so little of it." "Gringotts seems to understand quite a bit," Harry said. Another adjustment behind those blue eyes. Still smiling. "Yes, the goblins are extraordinary researchers." "Did the audit turn up anything of interest?" Harry looked at him. He let the silence go one beat longer than was comfortable, just to see how Dumbledore sat in it, and the answer was, perfectly. No flicker. No lean forward of anxiety. Just patient blue eyes and a warm expression, and underneath it all, like a river under ice, the deliberate management of a man who had been doing this for a very long time. "The usual estate items," Harry said. "Property inventories. Vaults. That sort of thing. You know how thorough goblins are." "Indeed I do." Dumbledore picked up a small silver instrument from his desk, one of the spinning, humming ones that Harry had always assumed were monitoring devices, and turned it in his fingers. "Harry, I want to be honest with you about something." "Please," Harry said. "I have been thinking a great deal about the prophecy. About what it asks of you. About the burden it places on your shoulders at so young an age." He set the instrument down. "I have sometimes wondered whether I have been entirely fair to you. Whether I have shared enough, trusted you enough, with the information you deserve to have." Harry was quiet. He found, slightly to his own surprise, that he was not angry. He was watching, observing, with the cool clarity that the ring seemed to give him, or perhaps had always been in him and the rings had simply cleaned the lens. He was watching a brilliant man do what brilliant men do when they sense they are losing control of a variable: they increase intimacy. They lean in. They offer vulnerability as a tool. "I appreciate that, Professor," Harry said. "I would like to be more transparent with you going forward. About the Horcruxes. About the path ahead. I'd like that too," Harry said. "Can we start next week? I have a lot on my plate right now." Dumbledore blinked. It was the first thing that had gotten through. "Of course. Though I do want to, I'll send an owl," Harry said, and smiled, and it was a real smile, warm and genuine and entirely opaque. "Thank you for reaching out, Professor. I mean that." He left before Dumbledore could reposition. In the corridor outside, he kept walking at the same unhurried pace until he rounded the first corner, and then he stopped and leaned against the stone wall and breathed out slowly. Not because he was frightened. Because he needed a moment to simply acknowledge what had just happened, which was that he had sat in Albus Dumbledore's office, in range of the most accomplished legilimens in Britain, and let nothing through. The rings helped. They had a quality of clarity about them that made his magical presence harder to read, like trying to see something through light that is too clean. But it was also just him. He had looked at the most powerful wizard in the world and felt, for the first time, exactly level. It was a very strange and very good feeling. "He's worried," said a voice from slightly to his left. Harry turned his head. Luna Lovegood was sitting in a window alcove with her legs folded and a copy of the Quibbler upside down in her lap, which somehow managed to suggest both that she had been there for a while and that she had intended to be there the whole time. "Luna," Harry said. "What are you doing at Hogwarts in summer?" "Visiting the Thestrals," she said. "They get lonely when the students leave. Not that most students notice them, of course, but they notice the students." She tilted her head, her pale eyes moving to his right hand. "Those are very interesting rings. You can see them." "Of course I can see them." She said it mildly, as if the more relevant question was whether other people couldn't. "The fourth one has a color I've never seen before. Not quite gold and not quite bronze. More like the color of something remembering what it used to be." Harry looked at the bronze ring. It did, he thought, have that quality. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Can I trust you to keep it between us for now?" Luna considered this with genuine seriousness. "I never tell anyone things that aren't mine to tell," she said. "I sometimes tell people things that are, if I think it'll help. But I won't say anything you don't want said." He trusted her. It wasn't a reasoned decision, it was the same order of knowledge as knowing the rings were his when he touched them. He sat in the window opposite her and told her the outline of it. Not everything, not the full mechanics, but enough. The inheritance, the rings, what they could do, what he'd decided to do with them. Luna listened without interrupting, which was not surprising. What was surprising was the quality of her listening. It wasn't passive or vague but deeply, specifically attentive, the way very quiet people listen when they are taking in everything. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the grounds were golden and unhurried. "You're going to do both at once," she said. "Not one and then the other." "Yes. Because if you do Voldemort first, Dumbledore will move to contain what you've become before you can get to him. And if you do Dumbledore first, Voldemort will feel the magical disruption and go to ground." Harry looked at her. "Yes. Exactly that. I want to help," Luna said simply. "You might not like some of what happens in between." "I don't like most of what's happening already," she said, with a serenity that made it land harder rather than lighter. "That's never stopped me from doing what's right." He nodded. "I'm telling Neville too." Something moved in Luna's expression at that, quick and warm and then contained. "He'll say yes immediately," she said. "I know." Neville Longbottom said yes before Harry had finished the sentence. They were in the greenhouse at Neville's grandmother's house, Augusta Longbottom's idea of a garden being somewhat more ambitious than most, with a greenhouse that ran the length of the back of the property and smelled of warm earth and growing things and the particular green aliveness of well-tended plants. Neville had been repotting something when Harry arrived, his hands dark with soil, and he'd listened to the whole thing with his hands resting on the edge of the potting bench and his eyes getting progressively more focused with each sentence. "Yes," he said, when Harry stopped. "Then, when?" "A few weeks. 3 at the most." Neville nodded. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I want to be there. At the end." He paused, "for what you're going to do to Voldemort." "I know," Harry said. "I wouldn't do it without you." Neville looked at him, and there was something in his face that was not quite grief and not quite resolution but existed in the space between them, the look of someone who has been carrying something for a very long time and can finally see the path to setting it down. His parents were in St. Mungo's. They had been there since Neville was a year old. They had been put there by Bellatrix Lestrange and 2 others on Voldemort's direct order. Neville knew exactly what was at stake in a way that even Harry, with everything he'd lost, approached differently. "I've been practicing," Neville said. "I know that too," Harry said, and smiled. Neville smiled back, and it changed his face the way it always did. Neville Longbottom had a smile that was disproportionately large for the generally careful expression that preceded it, like something breaking through rather than turning on. "Gran's been pushing me since last year. She got Remus in to work with me over the summer. I've been doing dueling practice, charms, transfiguration." "You were always better than you thought you were," Harry said. "I was always exactly as good as I thought I was," Neville said matter-of-factly. "I just thought wrong." He turned back to his plant and resumed repotting it with the focused care that he gave to growing things. "What do you need from me specifically? Voldemort won't be alone when we go to him. There'll be Death Eaters. I need someone who can hold that perimeter." "I can do that." "I know." They worked in companionable silence for a while, Harry helping with the repotting in the clumsy, well-intentioned way of someone who knows almost nothing about plants, and the afternoon light moved through the greenhouse glass in long gold bars, and it felt, despite everything, almost peaceful. That evening Harry went back to Privet Drive and sat at his desk for a long time, not reading, not writing, just thinking with his hands flat on the desk and the 4 rings on his right hand and the window open to the Tuesday ordinary sounds of Privet Drive going about its suburban life. He thought about Dumbledore. Not with anger, the anger was there, present, a specific and justified thing, but it wasn't loud. He thought about the portrait of Phineas Nigellus that reported back to the headmaster's office. He thought about the trace on underage magic that meant every spell he cast was logged by the Ministry. He thought about the way Dumbledore's magic had felt around him, not malicious, not cold, nothing like Voldemort's bruising singular pulse. More like, management. Careful, caring, comprehensive management of a person who had been decided upon as a necessary sacrifice before he was old enough to walk. He thought about his mother's letter. "Don't let anyone tell you what to do with what's inside. It belongs to you. It was always yours." She had known. Not the whole of it, but enough. Enough to hide the vault. Enough to write the letter and seal it against the day he'd need it. His mother, who Dumbledore had let walk into that house without a word of warning, knowing what was coming, because the prophecy required it and the plan required her death. Harry had known this for a while. He had processed it in the way you process information that is too large to look at directly, obliquely, in pieces, over time. But the rings had done something to the oblique angles. They had made the geometry clear. He was not going to kill Dumbledore. He wanted to be very clear with himself about that, clear and unambiguous, because he knew himself well enough to know that once a decision was made he would execute it without flinching, and he needed the decision to be the right one. Dumbledore alive, old, entirely without magic, in a world he had tried to shape and failed, facing the outcome of a war he had tried to control and found beyond him, that was the consequence that fit the crime. Not death. Death would be too easy and too quiet and would allow the old man to leave on his own terms, which was the one thing he had spent 60 years ensuring he could do. And Voldemort, Tom Riddle, Harry had felt, through the rings, the specific quality of Voldemort's magic. The obsessive, self-consuming loop of it. A man who had cut himself into pieces trying to make himself unkillable and had achieved instead a kind of half-life, all the fear and none of the living. What did you do to a man like that? You couldn't give him back what he'd destroyed in himself. But you could stop him destroying anyone else. There was a knock at the door. Vernon, impossibly, leaving him alone, a recent development driven, Harry suspected, by the fact that Harry had stopped flinching whenever his uncle raised his voice, and Vernon Dursley had the instincts of a bully, which meant he understood on some level when a target had stopped being one. Harry turned the rings on his hand, feeling the 4 separate hums find their chord. 3 weeks. Maybe less. He had people he trusted, Hermione, who would plan and argue and stay. Sirius, who would fight without hesitation. Neville, who would hold the line. Luna, who would see things no one else would see. Remus, who he needed to tell, Remus, who had known his parents, who had been a weapon for Dumbledore's purposes more than once, who deserved better. He pulled out parchment and wrote, Remus. Need to see you. It's important and it's good news. Harry. He attached it to Hedwig, who had returned from her hunt and was regarding him with the amber intelligence that owls used when they were deciding whether the errand was worth their time. Yes, it's worth it, Harry told her. She huffed and flew. Harry went back to his split-intent practice. 2 streams, 2 targets, absolute and undivided and total in their direction. He held it for 6 minutes this time, and at the end of it the rings were warm against his fingers and his head was clear and his hands were completely steady. In a castle on the Scottish coast, Dumbledore sat at his desk in the long summer evening and turned a silver instrument in his fingers and looked at the empty doorway his most dangerous student had walked through 3 hours ago, and thought, carefully, about pawns. In a dark northern fortress, something cold and deliberate pulsed on, the way it always had, certain of itself, unaware that certainty is not the same thing as safety. And in a small room in Surrey, Harry Potter practiced dividing himself in 2 and found, to his complete lack of surprise, that he was very good at it. Chapter 3, The Architecture of War. Remus Lupin arrived on a Monday, which was not the day Harry had specified but was, Remus explained, the day he could get away without raising questions from people who asked too many of them. He came through the flue at Sirius's flat with a battered traveling bag over one shoulder and the particular expression he wore when he had already worked out that he wasn't going to like something and had decided to hear it out anyway. Sirius handed him tea before he'd fully straightened up. That bad? Remus said. Sit down, Sirius said. Remus sat. He looked at Harry. He looked at the rings. He picked up his tea and drank half of it in one go with the resigned efficiency of a man loading ammunition. All right, he said. Tell me. Harry told him. The same outline he'd given Luna, but fuller. Remus deserved fuller. He watched Remus's face move through a sequence of responses that were mostly internal, the slight tension around his eyes at the Merlin inheritance, the very still quality he went into when Harry described what the rings could do, and then, at the part about stripping both of them simultaneously, a long exhale through his nose that was not quite a sigh but carried the weight of one. You've already decided, Remus said when Harry finished. It wasn't an accusation. Yes, Harry said. And you're telling me because you deserve to know. Because you're not a tool and I won't treat you like one. And because I might need you and I won't ask for that without giving you the full picture first. Remus was quiet for a moment. Outside the flat single window, Edinburgh was doing its grey and textured thing, clouds moving fast above the rooftops, pigeons on the windowsill getting on with their pigeon lives. Albus is going to see this coming, Remus said. Perhaps not the specifics. But he'll feel the shape of it. I know. I've given him a face he can read and a timeline he can't. He'll reach out to people close to you. He'll look for the crack in the circle. Remus set his cup down. He might come to me. I know that too, Harry said. Remus looked at him steadily. And if he does? That's your decision, Harry said. I'm not asking you to lie to him. I'm not asking you to choose. I'm just telling you what I know so that whatever you decide it with open eyes. Another silence. Sirius was leaning in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed, watching Remus with the fond wariness of someone who knows exactly how the person they love works and is giving them space to work. You're not the boy I met at Hogwarts 3 years ago, Remus said eventually. No, Harry agreed. James would have done this differently. Louder. More confrontationally. I know. You're doing it like, Remus paused, searching for the word. Like Lily would have. The same thing, but from the inside out. All the moving pieces already placed before anyone knows there's a game. Harry said nothing. He looked at the rings on his hand and thought, not for the first time, about a woman who had known enough to write a letter and seal it in a vault against the day her son might need it. I'm in, Remus said. What do you need from me? What Harry needed from Remus was intelligence. This was Hermione's contribution to the planning session that happened 2 days later, all 5 of them around Sirius's kitchen table, the mismatched chairs pulled close, the window open to a cool Edinburgh morning that kept threatening rain. Hermione had a large sheet of parchment spread in the center of the table with a hand-drawn map of known Death Eater locations on one side and a timeline on the other, and she had been updating it since 6 that morning, which Harry knew because she'd sent him an owl at 6:15 to correct a detail she'd initially gotten wrong. Remus has access to Dumbledore's inner circle in a way none of the rest of us do, Hermione said, her quill moving as she talked. Not as a spy, I'm not suggesting that, but he's at order meetings. He hears things. We need to know 2 specific things, Voldemort's current location, and Dumbledore's current suspicion level. Location I can probably get, Remus said. The Order has assets tracking Death Eater movement. I can listen without asking directly. Suspicion level is harder, Sirius said. Dumbledore's suspicion level is always high, Luna said. She was sitting at the end of the table with a cup of tea and her quibbler, which she'd set aside when the meeting started but had a habit of picking up in moments of thought, as if it were less a magazine and more a thinking prop. The question is whether his suspicion has become fear. What's the distinction? Neville asked. When Dumbledore is suspicious he manages. When he's afraid he acts. She looked at Harry. He's been afraid before. He was afraid when Voldemort first rose. He was afraid after the Ministry. She tilted her head. He's afraid now. Of Harry, specifically. He just doesn't know he is yet. The table was quiet for a moment. How do you know that? Sirius asked, not dismissively, genuinely. Because I've been watching him for 3 years and people who are accustomed to being the most powerful person in a room have a specific way of looking at something that might be bigger than them. He looks at Harry that way. He always has. She picked up her quibbler. He just hasn't admitted to himself what it means. Harry let that settle and then moved them forward. Timeline, he said. Hermione. Hermione tapped the right side of the parchment. Voldemort is currently at a location we believe is the Lestrange estate in Yorkshire. Confirmed sightings 3 days ago by 2 separate Order members. He's been there for approximately 2 weeks and there are no indicators of movement. He's receiving people, not going to them. That means he's building something. Infrastructure, alliances, a new inner circle to replace the people lost at the Ministry. She paused. He won't leave that location for at least another 10 days. Possibly longer. What changes at 10 days? Neville asked. There's a Death Eater meeting scheduled, we think, based on the communication patterns the Order has intercepted, for approximately the 17th. Big gathering. Which means the days before it he'll be at his most stationary. And Dumbledore? Harry said. His schedule is more complicated. He has Order business, Ministry meetings, school preparation. He's harder to pin to a location. She tapped the other side of the parchment. But there's a window. The 21st. It's a Wednesday. No order meeting, no known ministry business. Historically, on quiet days, Dumbledore spends his evenings at Hogwarts in his office. He doesn't go out. He doesn't travel. You want to do them both on the same day, Remus said. We have to, Harry said. The Lestrange estate in the early evening, before the light goes completely. Then Hogwarts. That's not a lot of time between the two, Neville said. No, Harry agreed. Which is why the Death Eater situation has to be completely contained before I move on Voldemort. I can't go into that building with a perimeter problem. Neville nodded once. I'll handle the perimeter. There was no bravado in it, it was the same tone as I'll handle the repotting, a statement of intention based on an accurate assessment of capability. Harry looked at him and felt the specific warmth of knowing that the person next to you is exactly what they say they are. I need to practice the location entry, Harry said. I can't apparate directly into the estate, wards. We'll need to go on foot from the outer boundary. 200 meters of open ground, Hermione said. I've been looking at the estate layout. There's a tree line on the north approach. We come in from there. How are we getting to Yorkshire? Sirius asked. You're not going, Harry said. Sirius looked at him. This isn't, Harry paused, choosing words. You came back through the veil 6 weeks ago. You're not registered with the ministry, you don't legally exist yet from their perspective, and if something goes wrong and you're captured, Dumbledore has leverage I can't counter. He met Sirius's eyes. I need you somewhere safe and accessible, not in a field in Yorkshire. Harry, Sirius. Harry said it quietly, without any heat, and Sirius stopped. I need you alive. You're the first person in my life I haven't had to be careful about losing. I'd like to keep it that way. The silence that followed was the particular silence of an argument that has been won before it fully started, not by force but by truth. Sirius uncrossed his arms. He looked at the ceiling. He looked back at Harry. I hate this, he said. I know. I'm going to sit here for 2 weeks drinking tea and growing plants while you and a 16-year-old go to a Death Eater fortress. Neville's 17, Harry said. Oh, tremendously reassuring, thank you. You're coordinating, Hermione said briskly. Here, from the floor. You're the communication anchor. If anything goes wrong, you're the one who moves the pieces we've prepositioned. She had already written his name on the parchment in a box marked coordination. Sirius looked at it with an expression that suggested he knew he'd been efficiently managed but couldn't find the specific objection. Remus is with you. You both stay here until we contact you. Remus raised an eyebrow. I also hate this. Duly noted, Hermione said, and capped her quill. The next 10 days were, in their way, the strangest of Harry's life, which was saying something given that his life had included a 3-headed dog, a basilisk, a graveyard resurrection, and a ministry battle. The strangeness was not dramatic. It was the strangeness of purpose, of having a clear, fixed point on the horizon and moving toward it with every day, every decision, every hour of practice. He split his time between Privet Drive, where he trained, and Edinburgh, where they planned. He kept his face neutral at Privet Drive, kept the Dursleys in their lane with the particular low-grade authority he discovered he now projected without trying, and spent his evenings cross-legged on the floor with the 4 rings on his hand and 2 names in his mind like 2 fires he was learning to tend simultaneously. He could sustain the divided intent for 40 minutes by day 5. By day 8 it was indefinite. He could hold it as long as he needed, the 2 streams separate and absolute, neither one cannibalizing the other. The key had been something Luna said on the second day of practice when she'd stopped by to watch, sitting in the corner with her legs tucked under her and her pale eyes tracking something he couldn't see. You keep thinking of them as separate things to hold, she'd said. Like plates to spin. But they're not separate. They're both just not you. The distinction between them is irrelevant to the act. You just need to know where they are. He'd tried it her way. It had worked immediately. Luna Lovegood's mind, he had concluded some time ago, operated on principles that were either pure intuition or a form of lateral logic so advanced it appeared to be intuition. He'd stopped trying to reverse engineer it and had started just listening. On day 6, something else happened. He was at Gringotts for the weekly estate meeting. The full inventory was nearly complete, Ragnarok's team having assembled 4 bloodlines worth of assets into a single document that ran to 47 pages and included 3 properties Harry hadn't known existed, a collection of dark artifacts that made Hermione's eyes go wide, several binding agreements with magical creatures dating back centuries, and one item that stopped both of them cold, a letter from Ignotus Peverell himself, 600 years old, magically preserved, addressed to, the one who finally brings the 3 together. He read it in the vault. Hermione read it over his shoulder. It was not long. Ignotus had been a man of few words, apparently. The letter was less than a page, the handwriting old but legible. It said, essentially, that he had hidden the full potential of the Hallows magic in the family rings because he had seen, in the particular clairvoyance that occasionally attached itself to the Peverell line, that a day would come when someone would need to use it not for power or conquest but for correction. For setting right what had been bent. He wrote, the Deathly Hallows were never meant to make a man a master of death. They were meant to make a man the master of himself. Everything else follows from that. Harry folded that letter and put it with his mother's. On day 9, Remus came to Edinburgh with information. He came in through the flue at 11 at night, which meant order business had run late, and he sat down at the kitchen table and accepted a glass of fire whiskey from Sirius and then told them what he'd heard. Voldemort was still at the Lestrange estate. The Death Eater meeting on the 17th had been confirmed, not by Remus directly, but by 2 separate pieces of intercepted communication that the Order had decoded. Attendance was expected to be 12 to 15 Death Eaters, plus Voldemort himself, gathered in the estate's main hall. The 18th, Remus said. The day after. He'll dismiss most of them. He keeps perhaps 4 or 5 close lieutenants at all times, Bellatrix, Lucius Malfoy though he's fallen somewhat out of favor, Yaxley, Dolohov. The others scatter. He looked at Harry. The 18th, in the late afternoon, the estate will be as quiet as it gets. The 21st was our target, Hermione said. The 21st still works for Dumbledore, Remus said. But it's a 3-day gap. If you do Voldemort on the 18th and Dumbledore on the 21st, 3 days is too long, Harry said immediately. If Voldemort is stripped and any of the Death Eaters escape before we contain them, they'll scatter and some of them will reach Dumbledore. Not to warn him, to beg for help, for direction, because their lord has just been, he paused, neutralized. And Dumbledore will start asking questions we can't afford him to ask yet. Then both on the 18th, Neville said. Everyone looked at him. He shrugged, not defensively. Voldemort in the late afternoon. Dumbledore that evening. You said the window for Dumbledore is wide open on quiet Wednesdays, is the 18th a Wednesday? Hermione checked her timeline. A pause. Yes, she said. Then it's already the right day, Neville said. We just moved the whole plan 3 days earlier. Another silence. Harry ran the timeline in his head. 3 days earlier meant the day after tomorrow. Not 10 days. 2. Can we be ready? He asked Hermione. She was already checking her notes, not the frantic checking of someone trying to catch up but the systematic checking of someone who has been preparing for exactly this kind of question. She went through the list without looking up, estate resources confirmed and accessible, properties with relevant protections identified, the Gringotts documents filed for the post-action legal framework, communication lines established between all 5 of them. Yes, she said. I've been ready for 4 days. Harry looked at Neville. Ready, Neville said. Luna, who had been quiet in the corner, looked up from her quibbler. I'll need to be at Hogwarts, she said. Not for the action, for afterwards. Someone needs to be there when Dumbledore, she paused delicately, has his moment. You'll go to McGonagall, Harry said. It wasn't a question, he'd been thinking about McGonagall for days. There was no version of this plan's aftermath that didn't involve McGonagall, because there was no version in which the deputy headmistress of Hogwarts didn't need to be on the right side of what came next. Yes, Luna said. I'll manage her. Sirius made a sound. Manage her, he repeated. You're going to manage Minerva McGonagall. Someone has to, Luna said tranquilly. The day before, Harry went for a walk. Not a planning walk, not a training walk. Just a walk, through Edinburgh's evening streets, which he'd come to know a little in the past weeks, the long grey stone of the old town and the way the light came off the castle at dusk like the stone was remembering sunlight. He walked without his wand in his hand, without the rings doing anything more than their steady ambient hum, without an agenda. He was going to do something tomorrow that had never been done in the entire recorded history of magic, and he wanted one evening of being just a person walking through a city. He thought about the dead. His parents, obviously. Cedric Diggory, whose name he still couldn't hear without a specific tightness in his chest. The others, faces from the Ministry battle, from the war that had been happening slowly and then quickly around him his entire conscious life. He thought about Frank and Alice Longbottom, who were alive in the technical sense and absent in every sense that mattered. He thought about all the ordinary people in all the ordinary houses he was passing right now, muggles going about their evening lives, who had no idea that a war had been running in the world layered over theirs for decades. He wasn't doing this because of prophecy. He'd been very clear with himself about that. The prophecy was Dumbledore's framework, and he dismantled his relationship with it the way you dismantle something you've been leaning on and discover, once it's gone, that you've been capable of standing the whole time. He was doing this because it was right, in the particular clean moral clarity that the rings seemed to amplify or perhaps simply reflect back. It was right to stop men who were destroying the world. It was right to stop them in a way that preserved their lives while ending their ability to harm. It was right to do it himself, now, as himself, with the full measure of what he was, rather than waiting to be deployed as someone else's weapon at a time of someone else's choosing. He bought a sandwich from a muggle shop that was still open, because he hadn't eaten since breakfast, and walking on an empty stomach seemed like a bad use of what might be his last ordinary evening for a very long time. He sat on a bench and ate it and watched the city doing what cities do at dusk, the gradual shift from day rhythm to night rhythm, the different quality of noise, the lamps coming on one by one in the windows above the shops. His mobile phone, a basic one Hermione had insisted he get, in case the owls became conspicuous, buzzed in his pocket. A text from Hermione: weather looks clear for tomorrow. Early start. 3 p.m. at Sirius's. He typed back, 3 p.m. Get some sleep. A pause. Then, you too. And then, after another pause, Harry. We're going to be okay. He looked at the message for a moment. Then he put the phone away and finished his sandwich and watched the city's last hour of ordinary evening and held both names in his mind, not practicing, not straining, just holding them with the clean settled weight of something already done. Back at the flat, Sirius was still up. He was in the leather armchair with a glass of fire whiskey, not his first, by the look of it, but he was a man who held his drink with the composure of long practice, and when Harry came in he didn't say anything immediately, just gestured at the other chair. Harry sat. They were quiet for a while. The flat made its small sounds around them, the building settling, a car on the street outside, the particular almost silence of two people who are comfortable enough together that silence has stopped being something to fill. I used to think, Sirius said eventually, that the worst thing about Azkaban was the Dementors. And it was bad. It was as bad as you can imagine, and worse. But the worst thing, the actual worst, was knowing that James was dead and I couldn't do anything about it. Couldn't fix it, couldn't fight back, couldn't even grieve properly because the Dementors ate the grief the same as everything else. He turned the glass in his hands. And then the second worst thing, which I discovered later, was realizing that you existed and you were at Petunia's house and you were growing up there, and I knew that was wrong, deeply wrong, but I was in a cell and couldn't do anything about that either. Harry didn't say anything. You're 16, Sirius said. You should be worried about your OWL results and whether your Quidditch team has a chance next season and whatever girl, or boy, no judgment, has caught your attention. You should not be planning simultaneous magical strikes on the two most powerful wizards in Britain. He looked at Harry. And the thing that kills me, completely and genuinely kills me, is that you're not doing it because you don't have a choice. You're doing it because you chose to. Freely and entirely. And somehow that makes me prouder of you than anything. Harry was quiet for a moment. I'm not the boy you lost, he said. I know that. No, Sirius said. You're not James. You're not even, I don't know who you are, entirely. I don't think we've had enough time yet. But whoever you are, he stopped. Started again. Your mother would have known what to say right now. She always did. I just know that watching you these past weeks it's been something. Something good? Harry said. Yeah, Sirius said. Something very good. They stayed up another hour, not talking much, the fire whiskey getting lower, the city outside settling into its full dark quiet. It was, Harry thought, one of the best hours he'd spent in a long time. Ordinary in all the important ways. He slept well. 3 in the afternoon found all of them at the kitchen table with Hermione's updated map spread out and the afternoon light doing its best against the Edinburgh clouds. Hermione ran the final briefing with the precision of someone who has rehearsed it 4 times but is keeping the delivery fresh. Neville had his wand out, turning it in his fingers with the unconscious ease of someone who has been practicing hard enough that the wand has become an extension of the hand rather than a tool of it. Luna was writing something in the margins of her quibbler. She claimed it helped her think and nobody was inclined to argue. Entry approach from the North Tree Lane, Hermione said. 200 meters of open ground. We move on my signal when the wards confirm no detection sweep in progress. She'd spent 3 days studying the Lestrange ward configuration from the estate records in the Black family archive. The Black and Lestrange families had been closely connected for generations, and the wards on the estate were partly Black-derived, which meant the Black ring could identify them. Harry goes straight for the building. Neville, you hold the outer approach. Luna, I'll be at Hogwarts by 4, Luna said, without looking up from her quibbler. By 4, Hermione confirmed. McGonagall has a free period at 4:15. You should have her full attention by 4:30. She paused. After Harry is done at the estate, we have until he reaches Dumbledore's office to ensure she's in the building and aware of what's coming. She shouldn't be ambushed by it. She won't be, Luna said. The most important thing, Harry said, and the table went quiet in the specific way it did when he spoke with that particular quality of voice, not louder, not harder, just very clear, is that we don't freeze. Whatever we see in there, whoever's in that building, nobody freezes. We do what we came to do and we get out. He looked at each of them. Hermione, steady and fierce and entirely ready. Neville, jaw set, eyes clear. Luna, who looked up from her quibbler and met his gaze with those pale, calm eyes and something in her expression that was the absolute opposite of doubt. Tomorrow, Harry said. Tomorrow, Neville said. Outside the flat window, Edinburgh settled into its late afternoon grey, and 3 floors below, in the bookshop, someone turned the sign to closed and the day began its measured passage toward the last ordinary evening before everything changed. Remus arrived at 6 with food and a quiet competence about him that asked no questions and offered no speeches, just set the table and made tea and sat down with them, because some things don't need saying and the best thing a person can do sometimes is simply be present. Sirius told a story about the time James had accidentally transfigured an entire Quidditch pitch into custard during a third-year practical exam, and the laughter that followed was real and warm and entirely necessary, the way laughter is sometimes the most serious thing a group of people can do together. Harry went to bed at 10. He lay in the dark of the small room with the 4 rings on his hand and the steady chord of their hum filling the quiet, and he thought about nothing in particular, and slept. Tomorrow the architecture of war would change. He intended to be the one who changed it. Chapter 4, Blood remembers the ancestral memory came for him at 3 in the morning. He hadn't been expecting it. He'd gone to sleep easily, which was itself unusual. The night before anything significant in Harry's life had historically been a miserable exercise in ceiling staring, and he'd been deeply under when the rings began to warm against his fingers with a quality different from their usual hum. Less like a sound and more like a pull, the specific directional tug of something that wanted his attention and had decided the middle of the night was the appropriate time to demand it. He didn't fight it. He'd learned in the past 2 weeks that fighting the ring's instincts was roughly as productive as arguing with the tide. He let his breathing slow and his mind go quiet, and he followed the pull downward, which was the only direction that made sense when you were falling into something very old. It wasn't a dream. Dreams had a quality of lateral logic, of rules bending and faces sliding. This was more like walking into a building that had been standing for centuries and finding all the rooms still furnished. Specific and solid and entirely intentional. The first room was James Potter. Not James Potter as Harry knew him from photographs, the grinning, Quidditch bright boy with the perpetual bad hair. This was James Potter at 20, in the specific focus of someone doing something difficult and important, standing in what Harry recognized as the back room of a house he didn't know, working through a sequence of wandless magical exercises with the quiet intensity of someone who practiced alone because they didn't want to be seen practicing. James Potter, who was never as effortlessly brilliant as the story suggested and knew it and worked twice as hard to close the gap. James Potter, who had an anger in him, a genuine, bone-deep anger at injustice, that the stories always softened into charm and bravado, but which was real and sharp and present. James Potter, who had looked at Lily Evans and seen, with the terrible clarity that sometimes strikes people like lightning, exactly who she was, and known, with equal clarity, that he was not yet the person who deserved her, and had set about becoming that person with the same ferocious quiet work he brought to everything. Harry stood in that room and watched his father not as a legend but as a person, and felt something in his chest settle that had been unsettled for 16 years. The room shifted. The second room was Sirius Black, which surprised him, not Sirius as he was now, but Sirius at 15, in the entrance hall of Grimmauld Place, standing in front of his parents with the specific set of his shoulders that Harry had already learned to read as "I will not bend on this, not ever, not for any price." The Black family magic was in this room like a weather system, heavy and cold and ancient, the accumulated weight of centuries of power wielded without conscience, and Sirius stood in the middle of it looking like someone planted in bad soil who had decided to grow upward anyway regardless of the direction the gardener wanted. The magic in this room was darker than the Potter room. The ring understood this and didn't apologize for it. The Black inheritance was not a clean inheritance. It was complex and tainted and shot through with choices Harry would never make, but it was also, woven through all of that, a genuinely extraordinary magical tradition that had nothing to do with the dark arts specifically and everything to do with a capacity for magical will that was almost structural. The Blacks had been powerful not because of their blood purity myths but because they had trained, generation after generation, with a seriousness bordering on obsession, and that training lived in the ring the way a muscle memory lives in a hand. Harry took what the ring offered and left the ideology behind, which felt about right. The third room was the Peverell room, and it was not a room at all. It was a crossroads. Literally, a crossroads in a wood at night, with 3 paths leading away into darkness and a quality of cold air that had no season in it, the air of a place that exists outside of time rather than within it. The Peverell memory was not one person. It was a principle. The 3 brothers had each taken their gift and each had suffered and died for how they'd chosen to use it, and the memory the ring held was not the story of 3 men but the understanding those 3 lives had collectively produced. Which was, that power over death is not mastery of death. That the only thing you can truly master is yourself. That the Hallows were never weapons and never prizes, they were tests, dressed up as prizes, offered to men who wanted power and designed to teach them, at considerable cost, that power over external things is an illusion and the only meaningful sovereignty is internal. Ignotus had understood this. Eventually. His letter had said as much. He had taken the cloak not as a prize but as a tool for a quiet life, and had lived that quiet life fully, and died when he was ready, which was the only ending that was also a beginning. Harry stood at the crossroads and felt the Peverell ring align something in him that had been slightly tilted his whole life, the part of him that had always known that death was not the worst thing, that the fear of it was far more corrosive than the fact that Voldemort's entire catastrophic trajectory had been powered entirely by that terror and nothing else. He felt it align and then he felt it settle and then he felt something else, something that was part of the Peverell inheritance and part of something else, something that didn't have a name yet but felt like the beginning of one. He walked out of the crossroads. And into the fourth room. The Merlin room was not a room. It was not a crossroads. It was not a building or a place or any fixed location at all. It was a presence. The bronze ring had been warmer than the others from the moment he'd put it on, and he'd been aware of something vast and patient behind it the way you're aware of the sun behind clouds, not seeing it directly but feeling the heat of it, the specific quality of illumination it cast on everything else. Now, in this deep night ancestral memory, the cloud was gone. Merlin was not what the stories described. He was not an old man with a long beard and a hat covered in stars, not the court wizard of a king, not the archetype of the wise mentor that generations of storytellers had made of him. He was a man of perhaps 30, with dark hair and an unremarkable face that you would not look twice at on a street, wearing ordinary clothes, sitting at a table in an ordinary room with a cup of something in his hands and his eyes open and entirely, absolutely present. He didn't speak, exactly. The communication in this room was not language, it was more direct than that, the way the ring's hum was more direct than speech. Harry understood what Merlin was offering not as sentences but as understanding, arriving whole and complete. The understanding was this: magic is will made manifest. Everything else, wands, incantations, ritual, gesture, is scaffolding. Helpful scaffolding, necessary scaffolding, but scaffolding. The scaffolding is not the building. Most wizards and witches spend their entire lives studying the scaffolding and never see the building it supports, because the building is invisible if you don't know how to look at it. Merlin's magic had been different not in kind but in orientation. He had looked at the building. He had understood, with a completeness that had taken most of his life to arrive at, that the limit of a wizard's power was not their bloodline or their training or their wand or their knowledge but the absolute, unconditional willingness to mean what they were doing. The ring amplified will. But it could only amplify what was already there. It could not manufacture conviction. It could not create certainty in someone who was performing certainty rather than owning it. Harry understood something then, standing in that not room with Merlin's presence around him like the feeling of being in a very old building that is entirely still. He understood why the convergence had to be him. Not because of destiny, which he had thoroughly rejected as a framework, but because of the specific combination of what he was. The Potter precision, the Black capacity for will, the Peverell relationship with the threshold between states of existence, and the Merlin orientation toward the building rather than the scaffolding, these four things in one person, and in this particular person who had spent his entire life being pushed toward something without being asked whether he wanted to go, and who had finally looked up from the map someone else had drawn and said, "I'll draw my own." You had to mean it absolutely, Merlin's memory told him. When you point the four rings at two people simultaneously and push, there can be nothing in you that equivocates. Not guilt about what you're doing to them, not fear of the consequence, not grief for the versions of those people that might have existed if they'd made different choices. Not because those feelings are wrong, they aren't, but because you cannot allow them to interrupt the act in the middle, and the middle will be the most difficult moment. Harry thought, I know. Merlin's presence, if it had a face in that moment, would have been smiling. Not warmly, exactly. More like the smile of recognition, of seeing something you expected and being pleased that your expectation was correct. The presence said, in the only fragment of actual language the room produced, the hardest thing you'll do is not the stripping. The hardest thing will be knowing that Albus Dumbledore loves you and doing it anyway. Don't confuse love with permission. Harry woke up. The morning light was grey and specific, Edinburgh morning light that came in through the gap in the curtains and laid a long pale rectangle across the floor. He lay still for a moment, the four memories settling into him like sediment, and then he sat up. He felt different. Not transformed, not electrified or enlightened in the dramatic sense the stories always described. More like he'd been carrying a pack and had just had the chance to properly redistribute the weight. The same load, but better balanced, and therefore easier to carry for a long distance. He got up, washed his face, got dressed, and went to find breakfast. Sirius was already in the kitchen. It was 6 in the morning and Sirius Black was standing at the stove making eggs, which was not a sentence Harry had ever expected to be true, and he was doing it with the careful attention of someone who considers eggs an adversary worthy of respect. "The rings showed me something last night," Harry said, pouring tea. Sirius didn't turn around. "The ancestral memory? You knew about that? Happened to me once. When I was about 20 and deeply stupid and did something that woke up the Black family ring that's been lost for 30 years. He slid the eggs onto a plate. Showed me 3 generations of ancestors. Most of them were awful, honestly. Didn't make for cheerful viewing. Mine was better," Harry said. "Yeah, I imagine it was." Sirius sat down across from him. "Are you ready?" Harry picked up his fork. "Yes." "Scared?" "No." Sirius looked at him. "Not even a little." Harry thought about it honestly, because Sirius deserved honesty and also because he deserved it from himself. He turned the question around, examined it from different angles, looking for the fear. He found concern, a targeted, practical concern about specific variables in the plan, about the Death Eaters at the estate, about Neville's perimeter, about the timing between Yorkshire and Hogwarts. He found care, for the people who were going with him, for what came after, for all the parts of the world that would shift when this was done. But fear, in the animal flight or freeze sense, in the small and cold sense of something being larger than you and you having no answer to it, no. He didn't find that. "Not really," he said. Sirius nodded slowly. "James was always afraid before something big," he said. "Not in a way that stopped him. But I always knew." He looked at Harry with something considering in his expression. "You're not James." "No," Harry said. "That's all right," Sirius said. "The world had James. Now it gets you." He stood up and took his plate to the sink. "Eat your eggs." They left at 2 in the afternoon. Hermione had spent the morning on final checks that she'd already done 4 times, which Harry allowed because he understood this was how she managed the particular kind of anxiety that came from having thought of everything and needing to think of it all again to be sure. Neville arrived at 1:30 with his bag and his wand and a calm about him that was not the calm of someone suppressing feelings but of someone who had already processed their feelings and arrived on the other side of them some days ago. Luna had left at dawn. She'd come into the kitchen before leaving, while Sirius was still making eggs and Harry was drinking his tea, and she'd stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at Harry with those pale perceptive eyes and said, "The Thestrals at Hogwarts will know something is happening before it happens. They always do. And then, McGonagall is braver than she knows she is. I'll remind her." And then she'd gone, quiet and purposeful as a cat, and the door had clicked shut behind her. The 3 of them, Harry, Hermione, Neville, apparat to a field in North Yorkshire from the Edinburgh flat, which was not a comfortable apparition because Harry was taking them all on a specific coordinate rather than a known location and that always had a slight jarring quality, like arriving somewhere in the middle of a sentence. They landed in long grass with a grey sky above them and the smell of recent rain in the soil. The Lestrange estate was visible from here, not close, but present, a dark stone building set back from the crest of a low hill, surrounded by the kind of extensive grounds that old money produced, the kind of grounds that said we have always been here and we intend to go on being here. The tree line Hermione had identified was to the north, a dense stand of elms that gave them cover. They moved into it without speaking. Under the trees it was dimmer, the light filtered to something greenish and specific. Hermione had her wand out and she was walking a slow careful pattern, testing the ward boundary, and Harry let her work while he stood with the rings warm on his hand and stretched his magical awareness outward the way he'd learned to do since Gringotts. The estate's magical signature was dense. Multiple overlapping wards, some old, some recent, several that had the specific cold stamp of dark magic laid with precision and intent. And underneath all of it, deeper, heavier, singular in a way that made everything else seem like decoration, Voldemort. Still there. Not moving. The pulse Harry had first felt at Gringotts, the bad tooth sensation, steady and patient and entirely self-contained. And in the estate, moving, several other signatures. 5 distinct ones within the building. Harry felt Bellatrix Lestrange's magic immediately. It was impossible not to. It had a quality like glass breaking, jagged and bright and incapable of being quiet even when she was sitting still. Dumbledore, who had a colder signature, more deliberate. 3 others he didn't specifically recognize but tagged as Death Eaters by the characteristic shape of dark magic long practiced and regularly used. 5 in the building, he said quietly. Plus Voldemort. The rest have gone. Hermione looked up from her ward work. I can see the outer ward boundary. There. She indicated a point about 20 meters ahead, where the air had a very faint shimmer that was less visual than it was a quality of wrongness in the light. It's primarily a detection ward, it'll trigger if we cross it without suppression. The black ring. Harry raised his right hand and focused the ring's severing quality at the ward boundary. It was like finding the seam on a piece of fabric. Once you could feel it, the cut was clean and immediate. The shimmer disappeared. The wrongness in the air resolved. Done, Harry said. Neville had been scanning the ground since they arrived. No visible patrols. I'll give you 20 minutes from when you enter the building before I start worrying. Don't worry, Harry said. I'm going to worry. I'll just do it quietly. He met Harry's eyes. Go. I've got this. Harry nodded once. He looked at Hermione. Stay close until we're inside, he said. Once I'm in the main hall, you hold the corridor. I know, she said. I'll be fine. Go. The 200 meters of open ground took 90 seconds. Harry didn't run. Running attracted attention, snagged the peripheral vision, created noise. He walked with the particular quality of intention that the rings seemed to make possible, a kind of purposeful invisibility that wasn't a spell but functioned like one, the specific trick of moving as if you absolutely belong somewhere until the world agrees with you. The estate's front door was warded, but the wards were keyed to the dark mark, not to specific individuals, which meant the black ring's severing quality found them as easily as the outer boundary. The door opened. The entrance hall was empty. Dark stone, dark wood, old portraits with watchful eyes that Harry ignored. Voices from the right, a corridor, then a room, and even through stone he could hear them, Bellatrix, unmistakable, talking in the high bright way she had when she was performing loyalty, and underneath her voice a lower sound that was less a voice and more a quality of sound, something that the air organized itself around without wanting to. He followed it. The main hall of Lestrange Manor was a room that announced its own importance, high ceilings, long table, torches in iron brackets along the walls. For Death Eaters at the table, one standing near the far fireplace. Voldemort. Tom Riddle was seated by the fire, or at least, the thing Tom Riddle had made of himself was seated by the fire, and the crimson eyes turned to the doorway the moment Harry stepped through it with the reflexive alertness of someone who has spent decades being dangerous and knows that attention is survival. There was a silence. Harry Potter, Voldemort said. The Death Eaters came out of their chairs. Bellatrix had her wand up before she was fully upright, and Dumbledore was moving sideways, trying for an angle, and the other 3 were reaching, and Harry felt all of this the way you feel weather, as information to be processed, not as threat to be feared. He hit all 4 Death Eaters with a single wandless burst that came from the Potter ring's binding precision, a full-body binding that left them on their feet but entirely unable to move, wands clattering to the stone floor. Not Voldemort. Voldemort he left untouched, because the binding wouldn't hold Voldemort and he didn't need it to. Voldemort had not moved. His eyes tracked the 4 frozen Death Eaters and then moved back to Harry with an expression that was not quite surprise. Voldemort did not permit himself surprise, but was the closely managed cousin of it. You walked in here alone, he said. Yes, Harry said. Through my wards. Through your wards. Wandless, Voldemort said, and now there was a quality in the voice that was not admiration but was adjacent to a form of it, the recognition, from one predator to another, of capability. And those rings. His eyes moved to Harry's hand with an expression of focused attention. The Potter ring I recognize. The black ring. The Peverell ring. A pause. The fourth one I do not know. That's the interesting one, Harry said. He was aware, distantly, of Hermione in the corridor, her presence steady and warm, keeping the entrance clear. He was aware of Neville at the perimeter, doing his job without fuss. He was aware of Luna at Hogwarts, presumably doing something that would later be described as inexplicable and would have turned out to be exactly right. He held all of these awarenesses at the edge of his attention and kept the center of it fixed entirely on the man across the room. Voldemort stood. He was tall, taller than Harry remembered, or perhaps it was simply the firelight and the high-ceilinged room, and the movement was the smooth, unhurried movement of someone who has never in adult memory needed to hurry because everything has always, eventually, done what he required. I have 7, he began. You had 7, Harry said. 6 containers and one you put in me by accident. The Peverell ring identified them. All of them. When I put it on. Voldemort went very still. I know what you're about to think, Harry said. You're thinking you can legitimize me fast enough to understand what I am before I can do anything about it. You're thinking about the killing curse and whether the Horcruxes would sustain you through a second death. You're running the calculations. He paused. You've always been the most intelligent person in any room. That's not arrogance, it's accurate. The problem is that intelligence is only as useful as the information it operates on, and you're missing the critical piece. Which is? Voldemort said, and his voice was perfectly controlled, which meant he was not perfectly controlled and knew it. I'm not going to fight you, Harry said. There's nothing to fight. You already lost. He raised his right hand. The 4 rings didn't need an incantation. They didn't need a gesture, technically, though raising his hand was instinctive and felt right. They needed will, absolute and specific and undivided, toward this man, this specific fractured extraordinary broken man, who had spent 60 years trying to make himself untouchable and had achieved instead a kind of perfect isolation, cut off from every human thing by the very power he'd accumulated to protect himself from loss. Harry held one of the 2 streams of his divided intent, the one he'd been holding and honing and clarifying for 2 weeks, and aimed it. He had been told the hardest moment was not the stripping but the second before it. And in the second before it he saw what Merlin's memory had warned him about, not Voldemort, not the red eyes and the cold terrible power, but Tom Riddle. 11 years old, standing in the entrance of an orphanage with his hands in the pockets of clothes that didn't fit, looking at a letter that had arrived to tell him he was something more than what he'd been told he was, and on his face, for just that one moment that nobody had been there to see, something that might have been, in different circumstances, in a different world, something like hope. Harry felt grief for that boy and absolutely did not allow it to move his hand. The rings discharged. Harry had expected it to look like something. Light, perhaps, or the dramatic release of visible energy that accompanied most powerful magic. It didn't look like anything. It was entirely interior, from his perspective, the 4-part chord the rings had been making since Gringotts suddenly resolving into a single note, clear and total, directed with his absolute complete will toward the magical channels of the man across the room. What it felt like, from inside the act, was like turning off a star. Not snuffing it, not the violent extinguishing of an explosion. More like finding the source and removing the fuel, quietly and completely, so that the burning simply ceased to be sustained. Voldemort's magic was vast and old and enormously powerful, and it went out like a lamp turned down, not all at once, but in layers, the outer expressions of it first and then deeper, the wand-amplified channels, then the raw untrained channels, then the Horcrux anchors, which Harry felt as a series of distinct severing sensations, one after another, each one releasing something that had been held under terrible pressure for decades, like knots being cut. 6 cuts. Then the 7th, the fragment inside himself, and this one felt different, felt personal, felt like removing a splinter he'd had so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of him, and when it was gone the space it left was not emptiness but clean air. Voldemort made no sound. His wand dropped from his hand. He stood for a moment with his arms slightly away from his body, like a man feeling for a wall in the dark and finding nothing, and then he sat down in the chair by the fire with the sudden involuntary quality of someone whose legs have made a decision without consultation. The crimson eyes were still crimson. Still intelligent. Still entirely present. He looked at Harry with an expression Harry would think about later and still not be entirely able to name. It was too complex for any single word, containing elements of fury and grief and something that in a different man might have been relief. "It's done," Harry said. "You're not dead. You're not in Azkaban. You're just finished. The magic is gone. The Horcruxes are gone." He paused. "You're Tom Riddle." "I was never," Voldemort began, and stopped, because the voice that came out was slightly different without the magic supporting it, older, thinner, more human. He closed his mouth. "You were always Tom Riddle," Harry said, not unkindly. "Everything else was a story you told yourself. A very powerful, very costly story." He left Tom Riddle sitting by the fire. Outside in the corridor, Hermione was exactly where he'd left her, and the expression on her face when he came through the door, the very controlled relief of someone who had been extremely calm under considerable pressure and was now permitting themselves a fraction of uncalm, said everything she didn't say out loud. "It worked," she said. "It worked. The Horcrux, gone," he said. "Mine too." She exhaled. Just once, precisely, and then she was herself again. "Neville," she said, touching her wand to a galleon in her pocket, "they'd set up the communication method 2 days ago." A warmth from the corresponding coin. Neville's confirmation pulse. "All clear, come out." They walked out of Lestrange Manor at 4:47 in the afternoon, into the grey Yorkshire light, and Harry could feel the estate's wards already starting to destabilize behind them without the magical authority that had set them to maintain. Neville met them at the tree lean, took one look at Harry's face, and said, "Good." Just that. Good. The perfect word. "We need to move," Harry said. "Hogwarts in 3 hours." They walked back through the long grass with the grey sky above them and the smell of recent rain in the soil, and Harry held the second stream of intent, the one he'd been holding alongside the first, patient and clear and entirely ready, and thought about Albus Dumbledore sitting in his office in Hogwarts with the long evening ahead of him. 3 hours. He kept walking. Chapter 5. The Headmaster's Gambit. Luna had arrived at Hogwarts at 3:58 in the afternoon, which was 2 minutes earlier than she told Hermione she would, because Luna Lovegood had a relationship with time that most people didn't understand and she'd learned to stop explaining it. She walked through the main doors with her wand in her pocket and her quibbler under her arm and the particular purposeful unhurriedness of someone who knows exactly where they're going and has decided the castle itself would probably like the company. The castle, for its part, seemed to agree. The corridors had that particular summer quality, long light, deep quiet, the sound of her footsteps carrying further than they should, and she moved through them with the ease of someone who has spent enough time in a place to know its moods. Hogwarts in summer was not an empty building. It was a building between conversations, resting, and it paid attention to the few people who moved through it with a quality of attention that most people didn't notice because they weren't paying attention back. Luna was always paying attention back. She found McGonagall not in her office, which was where she was scheduled to be, but in the Transfiguration classroom, standing at the window that looked out over the grounds with a cup of tea going cold in her hand and the expression of someone engaged in the very serious business of thinking about something they would prefer not to be thinking about. Luna knocked on the open door. McGonagall turned. Her expression moved through 3 rapid stages: surprise at a student being here in summer, adjustment at which student specifically, and then the particular settling that happened when Minerva McGonagall decided to simply deal with whatever was in front of her. "Miss Lovegood. I wasn't aware you were visiting." I wasn't either, until this morning, Luna said truthfully. She came into the room and sat in one of the front row student chairs without being invited, which McGonagall registered but didn't comment on, which told Luna that the older woman was already in a different mode than her usual classroom authority. I need to talk to you about Harry. The cup went down on the nearest desk. Is he all right? He's more than all right, Luna said. That's actually the thing. She looked at McGonagall steadily. I need you to understand some things before they happen, because what's coming in the next few hours is going to be very difficult to process if you don't have the context, and I think you deserve the context. McGonagall sat down. She didn't choose the teacher's chair, she chose a student's chair, the front row opposite Luna, which was itself a statement. How long have we got? A few hours, Luna said. Would you like to hear the long version or the short version? Both, McGonagall said. Luna opened her quibbler to the back page, where she'd been writing in the margins that morning, and began. Hermione had chosen the quibbler margin notes as the delivery mechanism deliberately. Not because she thought Luna couldn't explain it from memory, she could, perfectly, but because having a physical reference gave McGonagall something to look at when the weight of what she was being told became too much to hold while also maintaining eye contact. Hermione understood that some information needed somewhere to land that wasn't another person's face. Luna walked her through it in the order that made emotional sense rather than chronological sense, the what before the how, the why before the when. McGonagall was a precise and demanding listener who interrupted rarely, and when she did it was always the exact right question, the one that had been waiting to be asked. When Luna explained the 4 bloodlines, she asked a specific question about the Merlin inheritance and its legal standing that told Luna she was already thinking about the institutional implications rather than just the personal ones, which was exactly what they needed from her. When Luna got to the part about what the rings could do, and specifically what Harry intended to do with them today, McGonagall was quiet for a long time. Both, she said finally. He intends to strip both of them. He's already done Voldemort, Luna said, looking at her Gallian communication piece, which had given a warm pulse 11 minutes ago. He's on his way here now. McGonagall stood up. She walked to the window and stood there with her back to the room and her hands clasped behind her back in the rigid quality she had when she was containing something large. Luna let her contain it. Rushing McGonagall was like trying to rush a glacier, it didn't work and it wasn't respectful. Voldemort is, McGonagall said, not turning around. Magicless, Luna said. Tom Riddle. Sitting in the Lestrange estate without a scrap of power, none of the Horcruxes left. Harry dissolved them simultaneously. Including the one inside himself. Another silence. The Dumbledore matter, McGonagall said carefully, still to the window. Is necessary, Luna said. I know that's hard. I know what he is to you, what he's been to this school and to, you don't need to explain to me what Albus Dumbledore is, McGonagall said, and there was something in her voice that was not anger and not grief but occupied the precise middle ground between them. She turned around. Her face was entirely composed, which Luna understood as the highest possible register of internal intensity. I have known Albus for 43 years. I know exactly what he is. I know what he is capable of and I know what he has done and I have been, she stopped. I have been aware, for some time, that my regard for him has prevented me from seeing certain things clearly. That's very honest, Luna said. Don't comfort me, Miss Lovegood. I don't require it. McGonagall crossed back to the chair and sat. What do you need from me? I need you to be in the castle when Harry arrives. I need you to know what's happening so that when it's done you can manage what comes after without it being a shock. And I need you to, Luna paused, finding the right word, to witness. What Harry does needs a witness who the wizarding world will believe and respect. Not just friends who stood by him. McGonagall looked at her for a long moment. You planned this, she said. Not just Harry. All of you. Hermione, mostly, Luna said honestly. Harry made the decisions. Hermione built the framework. Something moved across McGonagall's face that was, very briefly, something like pride. Of course she did, she said quietly. At 6:45, something changed in the castle. Luna felt it first. She'd been sitting in the Transfiguration classroom with McGonagall for nearly 3 hours, the conversation having moved from briefing to something more genuine, the particular conversation that happens between two very different people who have found, with mutual surprise, that they understand each other. Luna had been looking at the window when the quality of the castle's attention shifted, the way a room shifts when someone important walks into it. "He's here," she said. McGonagall stood immediately. "His office." "Not yet," Luna said. "He needs to come to us first." She paused. "He'll know Harry's in the castle. He'll feel the rings. He's going to come here." She looked at McGonagall. "He's been waiting for this conversation." McGonagall's jaw set. "So have I." Dumbledore arrived 4 minutes later. He came into the Transfiguration classroom with his robes moving around him and the particular quality he had in a crisis of appearing completely unruffled while actually moving very fast. His eyes went to Luna first, a quick assessment, placing her, and then to McGonagall, reading her with 43 years of precision, and then he did something that surprised both of them. He stopped in the doorway and was still. "Minerva," he said. "Miss Lovegood." His voice was warm and measured and entirely unsurprised, which was itself a kind of performance. "I thought I might find you here." "Did you?" McGonagall said. "Not a question. Something is moving through the castle that I haven't felt in a very long time." He came into the room slowly, unhurried, and the portraits on the wall, 2 Transfiguration professors, 18th century, watched him with the particular alertness of painted minds responding to a situation they recognized as significant. "I wonder if either of you might be able to illuminate the situation." "Harry is coming," Luna said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I gathered." He sat, he chose the teacher's desk, settled into it with the ease of an old man who has sat in classrooms for 60 years, and looked at them both. "I had hoped," he said carefully, "to speak with Harry before he made any irrevocable decisions." "He's made them," McGonagall said. Dumbledore looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, very slightly, and Luna watched it shift with careful attention. Not surprise. Not anger. Something that had more grief in it than either of those, the expression of a man who had been building something for decades and could see the exact point where the architecture had failed, and understood it, even now, as a flaw in the building rather than the ambition. "You know," he said to McGonagall. "I know," she said. "And you agree with what he's—" "I didn't say that," McGonagall said precisely. "I said I know. My opinion will form after I've seen it." Dumbledore was quiet. He turned his half-moon glasses in his hands, which was a gesture Luna had never seen from him before. He was not a man who fidgeted, and in the fidget was a glimpse of something that lived under the extraordinary composure, something that was tired and old and carrying more than it wanted to. "I have made mistakes," he said. Not performing the admission, genuinely making it, with the specific heaviness of a true acknowledgement. "With Harry specifically. I know what I've asked of him. I know what I've arranged." He looked at his glasses. "I want you both to understand that I believe, that the cost was—" "We know what you believed," Luna said gently. "We know you meant it genuinely. That's the saddest part." Dumbledore looked at her for a moment. "You are a very unusual young woman, Miss Lovegood." "Thank you," Luna said. McGonagall moved to the window. "Albus. I have to ask you something directly and I need you to answer me directly." "Minerva, did you know?" she said. "About the Horcrux inside Harry. Did you know that you were sending him toward a death you had arranged?" The silence that followed was the longest Luna had heard in any room she'd sat in, and she had sat in a lot of rooms. "Yes," Dumbledore said. McGonagall's shoulders moved once, a single, contained movement that held an enormous amount. She didn't turn around. "I knew for several years," Dumbledore said. I had hoped, there was a possibility, in the theory, that the killing curse's destruction of the Horcrux fragment might spare Harry himself. A small possibility. I tried, he stopped. Started again. I tried to convince myself it was sufficient uncertainty to justify not telling him. But you knew it wasn't, McGonagall said. Still to the window. Yes, Dumbledore said. I knew. Luna watched the old man sit with that truth in the room. He didn't make excuses. He didn't offer the utilitarian calculus, the greater good argument, the long view. He had the grace, in this moment, to simply let the truth be what it was, and that grace, Luna thought, was real and not performed, and it made him more pitiable and not less. The castle's quality of attention shifted again. Closer. He's in the building, Luna said. Harry walked through Hogwarts in the long evening light with Hermione 2 steps behind him and the specific feeling of the school around him, old stone and old magic and the accumulated presence of centuries of young people learning things, making mistakes, becoming themselves. He had walked these corridors angry, frightened, lost, exhilarated, grieving. Tonight he walked them with something he was still identifying as he moved through it, something that sat in his chest with a steady warmth. He knew where Dumbledore was before he reached the Transfiguration corridor. He could feel the particular signature, old and subtle and arranged, that quality of scaffolding, and next to it, clear and precise and very slightly elevated, Minerva McGonagall. And the smaller, unassuming, distinctive presence that was Luna. He rounded the corner and stopped in the doorway of the Transfiguration classroom. The scene held for a moment. Dumbledore at the teacher's desk. McGonagall at the window. Luna in the front row with her quibbler in her lap, looking entirely at ease with the extraordinary tension she was sitting inside. Dumbledore looked at Harry. For all the composed authority of the man, for all the extraordinary poise that 60 years of being the most powerful figure in a room had built into him, something happened in his face when he looked at Harry that wasn't controlled. Not fear. Not guilt. Something older and more complicated. The look of a man who has been working on a very long problem and has, in this moment, seen the answer, and the answer is both simpler and more devastating than he expected. Harry, he said. Professor, Harry said. He came into the room. Hermione followed and positioned herself just inside the door with the quiet efficiency that she'd had all day, not obstructive, not aggressive, simply present, the particular presence of someone who is not going to leave. Dumbledore's eyes moved to Harry's right hand. He looked at the 4 rings for a long moment. The Potter, Black, and Peverell rings I recognize, he said. The 4th, he paused. Merlin's convergence ring. I thought it was theoretical. Most things people think are theoretical turn out to be literal, Harry said, if you're actually descended from them. You found the vault. Gringotts found it for me. Mandatory inheritance audit. Harry moved to the front of the room, not to the teacher's desk. He took a student's chair, the same kind Luna was sitting in, and sat in it with a loose ease that he could see registering on Dumbledore as a statement. I imagine you know why I'm here. I have a reasonable idea, Dumbledore said. He was looking at Harry steadily, and Harry let him look, showing him nothing that wasn't already decided. You went to Yorkshire first. Yes. And Voldemort is finished. The magic is gone. The Horcruxes are dissolved. Harry paused. Including the one you knew was inside me and didn't tell me about. The room had a quality of stillness that was different from before. McGonagall had turned from the window. Dumbledore, to his credit, did not pretend. Yes, he said. I knew. For how long? Since the end of your 4th year. 2 years, Harry said. The arithmetic was simple and the result of it sat in the room without decoration. Harry, I need you to understand. I do understand, Harry said. That's not why I'm here. I'm not here to punish you for the Horcrux. I'm not here because I'm angry, though I am. I'm here because of the larger thing. Because I can feel what your magic does around me. I've been able to feel it since I put the rings on, and I know what it is. It's not protection. It's management. He held Dumbledore's gaze. You've been managing me since before I could walk. Since the night you left me on the Dursley's step. Every decision you've made regarding me has been a decision made for the outcome you needed, not the person I actually am. Dumbledore was quiet. His hands were flat on the desk in front of him. And I understand your logic, Harry said. I've spent a lot of time sitting with it. The prophecy, the war, the greater good. I understand that you believe, genuinely believe, that the sum of everything you've done produces less suffering than the alternative. You might even be right about some of it. He paused. But you don't get to make that calculation on my behalf, without my knowledge, using my life as your variable. Nobody does. You're 16 years old, Dumbledore said. Not a challenge, something more honest than that. The response of a man who is genuinely wrestling with the ground shifting under him. And you are 115 and still operating from a framework built on the idea that some people's choices matter more than others, Harry said. The framework is wrong regardless of how old or powerful the person holding it is. Dumbledore looked at him. And in that look, through the long-practiced composure of the most controlled mind Harry had ever encountered, he could see what Merlin's memory had predicted, the love. Real, genuine, complicated, and entirely insufficient as a justification for what it had been used to sanction. Dumbledore loved him. Harry was certain of it. And it made exactly no difference. What are you going to do? Dumbledore said. His voice was very steady and very quiet. The same thing I did in Yorkshire, Harry said. A pause. You can't stop it, Harry continued. Not because you don't have the power, you do, and we both know it, and this would be a much harder conversation if I hadn't already done Voldemort before coming here. He saw something register on Dumbledore's face at that, understanding of the order of operations, understanding of why Yorkshire had to be first, understanding of the strategic logic, and in that understanding a flash of something that was almost professional respect. But because you know, if you sit with it honestly, that I'm right. That this is right. And you've always, when you could get quiet enough to hear it, you've always known. Dumbledore looked at the rings on Harry's hand. Then he looked at the room, at McGonagall, at Luna, at Hermione in the doorway. He looked at them with the specific attention of a man taking an inventory, not of threats but of witnesses, and seeing in those faces the confirmation of something he had perhaps allowed himself to hope would not be confirmed. McGonagall met his eyes. Her face was composed and unreadable and entirely present. She did not move. Dumbledore turned back to Harry. He removed his half-moon spectacles and set them on the desk. He folded his hands. And then he did the thing that Harry had not allowed himself to predict because prediction would have required hoping for it, and hope would have been a vulnerability. He said, "I'm sorry, Harry." Not the preamble to an argument. Not the setup for a counter. 2 words, clear and full, delivered with the weight of genuine reckoning. Harry was still for a moment. He felt the grief of it, real grief, for the mentor this man had never quite been, for the guardian he had almost been, for all the versions of a different story in which a different Dumbledore had made different choices. He felt it cleanly and completely, the way the Merlin ring had taught him to feel things, all the way through, without letting it deflect him. "I know," Harry said. "I believe you." He raised his right hand. "Stop," Dumbledore said, and it was not a command, he had no commands left, Harry realized, in this room with these people, it was a request, barely. "One question. Just one." Harry waited. "Will you build something?" Dumbledore said. "After. With what you're about to have." His blue eyes were very clear. "The power to strip magic, the convergence inheritance, the resources of 4 bloodlines. Will you use it to build something better than what we made? Or will you simply end this and step away?" Harry looked at him for a long moment. "I'm going to build everything," Harry said. A world where 16-year-olds don't have to die to resolve old men's wars. Where magical education isn't a pipeline into somebody's army. Where the ministry serves people instead of maintaining power. Where, he stopped. Yes. I'm going to build something. That's the whole point. Dumbledore nodded once. His face had an expression that was not peace, exactly, but was the direction of peace, a man settling into a truth after a long resistance. Then do what you came to do, he said. Harry raised his right hand and held the second stream of intent, the one he'd been holding since Yorkshire, patient and clear and complete, the one he'd practiced and refined and made absolute, and he pointed it at Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. And he meant it. The difference, stripping Dumbledore, was in the quality of what he felt going out. Voldemort's magic had been a dark cold star going dark, vast and self-consuming and ultimately isolated, all that power turned inward and feeding on itself. Dumbledore's magic was something else entirely. It was old and warm and extraordinarily beautiful, genuinely beautiful, in the way that things built over a very long time and tended with real love can be beautiful, even when they're being used badly. It was layered in ways Voldemort's never had been, shot through with 100 different intentions and memories and connections, and in the moment of the stripping Harry felt all of it like a landscape scene from a great height, every choice the old man had made, every act of real courage and real love alongside every act of manipulation and sacrifice of others. The rings found the magical channels. The black ring severed them. The Potter ring held the precision so that nothing outside those channels was touched, not the memories, not the mind, not the relationships, nothing but the magic itself. The Peverell ring smoothed the threshold, ensuring the transition between states was clean rather than damaging. The Merlin ring amplified his will into every corner of it until there was no gap, no mercy gap, no small flinch place where doubt could insert itself and ruin the work. It took 11 seconds. Dumbledore sat behind the desk and the magic went out of him, and what was left was an old man. Still brilliant. Still himself. The blue eyes still clear, the face still carrying its accumulation of decades. But the quality that had always been in a room with him, the ambient authority, the sense of enormous power at rest, was gone. He was just a person. McGonagall made a sound. Very small and very contained, but real. Dumbledore sat quietly for a moment. He looked at his hands, which was the same thing Voldemort had done, Harry realized, looked at the hands as if checking whether they were still his. He picked up his wand from the desk, pointed it at nothing in particular, and said, "Lumos." Nothing happened. He set the wand down carefully, parallel to the edge of the desk, with the precise placement of a man performing a very small, very dignified act of acceptance. "Well," he said. Then he stopped, because there wasn't really anything to add to that. He looked at Harry with those still clear blue eyes. "I hope you meant what you said. About building something." "I always mean what I say," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I'm beginning to understand that." McGonagall walked to the teacher's desk. She stood in front of it and she looked down at Albus Dumbledore, and everything that 43 years of loyalty and disagreement and unspoken argument and genuine love looked like when it was finally allowed to just look was in her face all at once. "Albus," she said. "Minerva," he said. "You should have told me," she said. "About Harry. About the Horcrux. You should have told me years ago." "Yes," he said. "I should have. I would have found another way." "I know," he said. "That's partly why I didn't." McGonagall breathed in slowly. Then she pulled a chair to the desk and sat down across from him, close, and whatever she said next she said quietly enough that Harry didn't hear it, and that seemed right. He looked at Luna, who was watching the two of them with an expression of something that might have been satisfaction, the complicated satisfaction of seeing a thing land where it was supposed to land. Harry turned to Hermione. She was standing in the doorway where she'd been the whole time, and she looked at him with an expression that he had now identified, the expression she'd had at Gringotts, when she'd been working out what to name what she was seeing. He thought she'd probably named it by now. Both, she said. Both, he confirmed. She crossed the room and the hug she gave him was fierce and brief and entirely Hermione, no performance, all feeling, quickly over, and then she was already thinking about the next thing, which was how he knew it was real. The Ministry is going to have a complete crisis by morning, she said into his shoulder. I know, he said. We should be ready. We will be. She pulled back and looked at him. Are you all right? He checked. The honest inventory he was learning to take, going through all the chambers, looking at what was actually there rather than what he expected to find. He found exhaustion, but clean exhaustion, the kind that comes from completion rather than defeat. He found grief, still present, still exactly what it had been. He found the faint new quality of the absence where the Horcrux fragment had been, the clean air, the space that was now entirely and uncomplicated his own. He found, underneath all of it, something he hadn't felt since he could remember feeling anything, a stillness. Not emptiness. Not the gray blankness that had sometimes visited him after the worst moments. Something warmer and more specific than that. The stillness of a person who has done what they came to do. Yes, he said. I'm really all right. Luna appeared at his elbow, quiet as a thought. The Thestrals are restless outside, she said. They feel the shift. It's not frightening them, it's interesting them. She looked at Harry. The castle feels different. Can you feel it? He could. The ambient magic of Hogwarts, which had always been present in the background of his life here, familiar as the smell of the Great Hall or the particular cold of the stone corridors in February, had a different quality now. Not stronger. More itself, somehow. As if the sustained presence of Dumbledore's management had been, without anyone intending it, a kind of filter, and the filter was gone. What happens next? Neville said. Harry turned. Neville was in the doorway. When had he arrived? He must have come through after Hermione, must have made his own way from Yorkshire, and he was standing there with his bag over his shoulder and dried mud on his boots from the field in Yorkshire and the expression he'd worn all day, level, clear, entirely present. Tomorrow, Harry said, everything starts. Tonight, he paused, looking at the room, at the castle, at the evening light going long and gold through the windows. Tonight we should probably eat. I haven't had anything since breakfast and I nearly unmade two of the most powerful wizards in history and I'd really like a sandwich. Neville laughed. It was a real laugh, open and sudden, and it broke something in the room that had needed breaking, and Hermione smiled and Luna said, entirely seriously, the kitchens will still have things. The house elves don't really stop, and they began to move, all of them, through the Hogwarts corridors in the long summer evening. Behind them in the Transfiguration classroom, Minerva McGonagall sat across from an old man who had run out of magic and the world had not ended, and the windows let in the last of the day, and somewhere above the castle the Thestrals were circling in the warm evening air, curious and calm, watching the shape of a new thing beginning. Chapter 6, Tom Riddle's Last Throne. The Death Eaters started turning up at the Ministry at 2 in the morning. Not all at once, that would have been almost manageable. They came in ones and twos, some of them still in their dark robes, some in hastily assembled Muggle clothes that suggested they'd been somewhere they weren't supposed to be when the news reached them, all of them with the specific disorientation of people whose entire framework for understanding the world had just been removed. 3 Aurors on night duty found themselves facing 8 Death Eaters in the atrium who were not, for once, trying to fight. They were trying to surrender, which in its way was more alarming. Word reached Kingsley Shacklebolt at 2:14. He arrived at the Ministry at 2:30, took one look at the situation, and sent a Patronus to 3 other senior Aurors. By 3 in the morning the atrium held 11 Death Eaters in various states of collapse, 12 increasingly overwhelmed Ministry personnel, and a rumor moving through the building like smoke through a cracked door, it's over, something happened, you know who is, finished. Nobody used the word stripped yet. That word would arrive later, with all the weight of its implications, and when it did it would change the conversation entirely. For now there was just the fact, arriving ahead of its explanation, the way facts sometimes do, the war was done. Kingsley sent a second Patronus at 3:15. This one went to Sirius Black's flat in Edinburgh. Sirius was awake. He'd been awake since the communication galleon had warmed in his hand at 4:47 the previous afternoon with Harry's pulse, and then again at 7:20 with Hermione's, and he had spent the intervening hours doing exactly what he told Harry he hated doing, sitting in the leather armchair, drinking tea and then fire whiskey and then tea again, growing nothing because the plants only needed watering once a day and he'd already done it, waiting. Remus was asleep on the sofa with the particular ability of a man who has learned to sleep in difficult circumstances because exhausting yourself with wakefulness helps no one, which was a marauder lesson from 6th year that Sirius had never quite managed to absorb. The Patronus came through at 3:18. Sirius woke Remus with a hand on his shoulder, and Remus sat up immediately in the way of someone whose nervous system has been trained to treat any waking as potentially urgent. "Ministry," Sirius said. "They need Kingsley's office in 4 hours." Remus looked at him. "Which means we need Harry." "Which means we need Harry," Sirius agreed. He sent his own Patronus, the large, loping dog that always made him feel, in a small private way, extremely himself, through the Flug connection to Hogwarts. Harry was in the Great Hall. Not sleeping. He tried sleeping in his old dormitory and found the familiar bed too familiar, too freighted with previous versions of himself, too small in every sense for what he currently was. He'd come down at midnight and the house elves had appeared within 4 minutes, which was either testament to their efficiency or evidence that they never truly slept, and he'd eaten 2 sandwiches and a bowl of soup and felt the day settle into him properly. Hermione had gone up to Gryffindor Tower. Neville had found a sofa in the common room. Luna had gone, somewhere. She always went somewhere that was exactly right but not explicable in advance. He was sitting on the Gryffindor table in the emptied hall, cross-legged, with his hands on his knees and the rings doing their steady post-action hum, which had a different quality now than it had before Yorkshire and Hogwarts. More settled. Less preparatory. The rings in the state of having been used for their purpose, which felt like the difference between a bow strung and a bow resting, the same object, the same capability, but a different tension. He was thinking about Tom Riddle. Specifically, he was thinking about what came next for Tom Riddle, which was a question he hadn't allowed himself to examine in detail before the fact because examining it would have been a distraction from the act itself. But now the act was done and the question was real. Tom Riddle was in the Lestrange estate in Yorkshire with 4 magically frozen Death Eaters and no power of any kind and presumably nobody coming to help him anytime soon. Harry had left him sitting by the fire, which had seemed right in the moment, dignified, at least, as exits went, but he was aware that leaving a man with no magic in a building with 4 other people who had no magic and no way of communicating with the outside world was a situation that would eventually become a ministry problem. He'd sent his Patronus, a stag, as always, the silver stag he'd always thought of as his father's shape, to Kingsley 3 hours ago with the location and a brief explanation. The brief explanation had been, in its entirety, Yorkshire. Lestrange estate. Voldemort and 4 Death Eaters. All magic stripped. Safe to collect. Harry. He'd considered adding more and decided against it. Kingsley was smart enough to work out the relevant details. Sirius's dog Patronus found him at 3:20 and delivered its message, and Harry unfolded from the table, stretched, and went to find the others. Kingsley Shacklebolt's office at the Ministry of Magic was not a large room, but it was a room that had learned, over years of hosting difficult conversations, to hold more than its square footage suggested. By 7 in the morning it held Kingsley himself behind the desk, Remus and Sirius along one wall, Harry and Hermione and Neville in chairs across the desk, and in the corner, slightly to one side of the main arrangement, Luna Lovegood, who had arrived before any of them and was sitting with her legs folded and her quibbler in her lap. "I've been at the ministry since 3 this morning," Kingsley said. He looked it, not haggard, but carrying the specific weight of a very long night. He was a big man with a contained authority and a mind that Harry had always found genuinely sharp, the kind of sharp that didn't announce itself. "I have 11 Death Eaters in holding." I have 30 ministry employees who know something extraordinary has happened and are about 40 minutes from the information reaching the prophet. I have a collection horror team in Yorkshire who called me at 5 a.m. to tell me they'd found, he paused, what they described as an old man sitting by a cold fire in an empty house, with 4 immobile Death Eaters on the floor and no trace of any dark magic in the building whatsoever. He looked at Harry. You'd like to explain? Harry explained. He gave Kingsley the full version, not because Kingsley needed managing the way others did, but because Kingsley genuinely needed the information to do his job, and his job over the next weeks was going to be extremely difficult and the least Harry could do was give him everything. Kingsley listened without interrupting. He had that quality, rare in powerful people, of being able to listen completely, to receive information without simultaneously composing his response to it. When Harry finished, Kingsley sat back in his chair and was quiet for a moment. Tom Riddle, he said. Tom Riddle, Harry confirmed. No magic. No Horcruxes. A pause. You're certain about the Horcruxes? I felt each of them dissolve, Harry said. The rings registered each anchor individually. There's nothing left. He's a 70-year-old man with no magical capability and no tether to anything beyond ordinary mortality. Kingsley looked at his desk. Then he looked at Harry. The Dumbledore matter is going to be significantly harder to manage politically. I know, Harry said. That's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. What followed was 2 hours of conversation that were, Harry thought, probably the most practically important 2 hours of his life. Kingsley was not just an Auror, he was politically astute in a way that the Order had always underutilized, had always understood the institutional landscape of magical Britain with a clarity that most of the Order's membership lacked because most of the Order's membership had, in various ways, been arranged around Dumbledore's framework, and inside that framework the political terrain had always been secondary to the magical one. Now the magical terrain had shifted and the political one was all that remained. Hermione drove most of the specifics. She had the notes she'd been building for weeks, the post-action framework she described at Sirius's kitchen table, and she walked Kingsley through them with the focused precision she brought to everything she considered genuinely important. The short version, a transitional magical authority, independent of the existing ministry structure, to oversee the next 6 months. Amnesty protocols for Death Eaters who surrendered. Immediate review of the Wisengamot. A Muggleborn Protection Act. Full audit of Hogwarts governance structure. Kingsley read the framework pages she handed him. He was quiet for a long time. Then, you wrote this? Yes, Hermione said. How old are you? 16. He looked at her. Then at Harry. Then he made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. All right, he said. Here's what I can do and here's what I can't. They worked until 9:30, at which point an urgent memo arrived by paper airplane informing Kingsley that the Daily Prophet had gotten the story, which was entirely expected and only slightly early, and the day shifted into its next phase. Harry left the ministry at 10 and went back to Yorkshire. He went alone, which Hermione argued about and Sirius argued about more, and he listened to both of them and went alone anyway, which was not stubbornness, or not entirely, but the specific knowledge that what needed to happen in that house could not happen with an audience. The Aurors had collected the 4 Death Eaters in the night. Bellatrix Lestrange, now stripped of magic and technically the most straightforwardly dangerous person in the building on the basis of sheer history, had apparently required 4 Aurors and a Muggle sedative to load into the transport, which told Harry that Bellatrix without magic was still significantly more alarming than most people with it. She was in holding at the ministry now. They all were. The estate was empty when he arrived. Or nearly empty. Tom Riddle was still by the fire, which had gone cold in the night. He was sitting in the same chair, wearing the same dark robes, and the morning light came through the manor windows and fell on a man who looked, Harry noted it with a precise, unsentimental eye, genuinely old. Not because the magic had aged him suddenly, the way the stories sometimes described magical stripping. The rings didn't work that way. He simply looked, without the ambient power that had always surrounded him, like what he was. A man in his late 60s or early 70s, thin, with a face that had never recovered the full humanity he'd cut away from himself in his 40s, but was no longer actively monstrous. The red had gone from his eyes, which were now a flat dark gray, the color of very deep water. He looked up when Harry came in. They looked at each other for a moment. The last time they'd looked at each other across a room there had been the full weight of a years-long war in it, the prophecy and the Horcruxes and the graveyard and all of it. Now there was just two people in a room, one with rings on his hand and one with nothing. "You came back," Tom Riddle said. "I said I would," Harry said. Harry pulled a chair from the long table and set it a few feet from Riddle's and sat. Not close enough for intimacy, not distant enough for performance. Just the natural distance of two people having a conversation. "The Aurors took the others," Riddle said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes. Last night. And Bellatrix." Something moved across Riddle's face at the name, not affection, Harry thought, but something complicated, the specific complexity of a connection that had existed for decades in a framework that didn't allow for genuine affection and had produced instead a kind of ownership, and even the ownership was gone now. "She's in Ministry Holding." Riddle looked at the cold fireplace. "And myself?" "That's what I came to talk about," Harry said. Riddle looked at him. The flat dark eyes had a quality Harry hadn't seen in them before, assessment that was purely intellectual, stripped of menace because the menace had no instrument now. Tom Riddle's mind was still there. Harry had known it would be, the ring stripped magic, not intelligence, not memory, not the accumulated knowledge and experience of a life. The mind behind those eyes was still one of the most extraordinary minds Harry had ever encountered, and the fact of it no longer frightened him and didn't need to. "You're going to send me to Azkaban," Riddle said. Not a complaint. A prediction, delivered in the flat tone of a man making calculations. "No," Harry said. A pause. "The Dementors are being removed from Azkaban," Harry said. "That's happening regardless. But specifically, no, not you." He watched Riddle's face process this. Azkaban would be a statement. A spectacle. An ongoing symbol. The wizarding world gathering around your imprisonment the way a wound gathers around whatever caused it, unable to heal because the thing is still there. He paused. "I don't want that." "What do you want?" Riddle said, and the question had no manipulation in it, which was strange. Voldemort had never asked a question without manipulation in it. Tom Riddle was asking a genuine question. "I want it to be over," Harry said. "Completely over. Not stored somewhere for people to keep looking at." He had thought about this on the walk from the apparition point. He had thought about it through the night. He had thought about what Dumbledore had asked him, "Will you build something?" and about what building something required, which was among other things the ability to close the past without erasing it. "There's a property," he said. "In Wales. Remote. It belongs to the Potter estate, it's been vacant for 40 years. It has basic wards, nothing elaborate. No fluke connection. It's not comfortable and it's not uncomfortable." Riddle was very still. "You'd be there under a binding agreement, a magical contract, which I'm aware is ironic given the situation, but the contract is held by Gringotts and doesn't require your magic to enforce, it requires mine. You go there. You stay there. You have what you need to live. Books. Basic amenities. Silence." Harry looked at him. "You're not going to do any more harm. You don't have the capacity. But I'm not going to perform your imprisonment for the crowd either. You'll just, be somewhere. Living. Quietly." Riddle looked at him for a long time. "Why?" "Because killing you serves a narrative," Harry said. "Imprisoning you publicly serves a narrative. I'm done with narratives about you. I'm done with everything that puts you at the center of anything." He held Riddle's gaze. "You spent 60 years trying to be immortal. I'm offering you something you never had. An ordinary life. A quiet end, whenever it comes. You're a child, Riddle said, not insultingly, with something like wonder. You're 16 years old. 17 next month, Harry said. Does it matter? Riddle looked at the cold fireplace again. What I've done, he said. The people he stopped. Something passed across his face that was painful to witness, not because it was familiar but because it was unfamiliar, because Tom Riddle, who had cut the capacity for this feeling out of himself deliberately and surgically, was having it anyway, the way an amputated limb still generates sensation in the space where it was. What I've done cannot be, no, Harry said. It can't. Then why not? Because what you deserve and what's useful are two different questions, Harry said. And I'm only interested in the second one. He stood. There'll be oars here in an hour to transport you to Wales. You'll have 48 hours in the property before the binding contract activates. Use them to settle in. He paused. There are books. I didn't know what you'd want, so I put in everything from the Potter library that wasn't dark magic. History, Muggle philosophy, some fiction. A beat. You can read whatever you like. He turned to go. Potter, Riddle said. Harry stopped. Why? Riddle paused, and Harry heard in the pause the specific difficulty of a man asking something he has no practice asking. Why didn't you just kill me? Harry turned back and looked at him. Tom Riddle, 60-something, no magic, no followers, no Horcruxes, no name that anyone would use again as a symbol of terror, sitting in a cold room in the house of a family he'd destroyed, asking why a 16-year-old boy had chosen to let him live. Because you're already dead, Harry said. Everything you made yourself into is gone. What's left is just a man. And I don't kill people who are just men. He left. Outside the estate the Yorkshire morning was clear and cold and the sky had the particular lucid quality that follows a night of rain. Harry walked through the long grass to the apparition point and felt the estate behind him with the ring's awareness, not Voldemort's pulse anymore, not the bad tooth sensation, just an old building in the morning light, magically quiet, holding nothing but a man in a chair and the accumulated damage of a life spent running from ordinary things. He apparat back to Edinburgh. Sirius was in the flat. He was not in the armchair, he was standing in the middle of the room, in motion when Harry came through, the particular restless energy of someone who has been trying not to pace and has recently stopped trying. Well, he said. Done, Harry said. He sat in the armchair. Wales. He agreed. He agreed. Sirius looked at him. You're letting him live in a Welsh cottage. A property on the Potter estate, yes. Harry, it's right, Harry said simply. I know it doesn't feel satisfying. I know Azkaban would feel satisfying, for about a week, and then it would just be something else to manage and something else for the papers to write about and something else that keeps his name current. He looked at Sirius. He needs to stop existing as a symbol. And you can't do that with a spectacle. Sirius sat down heavily on the sofa. He rubbed his face with both hands. Then he dropped them and looked at Harry with an expression that was tired and honest and very alive. You're a better man than I am, he said. You'd have done the same, Harry said. Give it a week. You'd have gotten there. I absolutely would not. No, Harry admitted. Probably not. He paused. That's why it's my decision to make, not yours. Sirius laughed. Really laughed, the big open laugh he'd had before Azkaban and was relearning, and Harry felt it as a warmth in the room. What's happening at the ministry? Harry asked. Sirius had been monitoring the floor all morning. The picture that emerged over the next hour was one of enormous, organized chaos, the kind of chaos that has a direction to it, that is moving somewhere even if the path is not yet clear. The Death Eater surrenders had continued through the morning. The Prophet had broken the story at 10 and the edition had sold out 3 times over and the Owlpost network was overwhelmed with correspondence moving between every wizarding household in Britain simultaneously. The headline had been, Voldemort neutralized, WHO stripped of magic by mystery power. The second edition, out by noon, had amended it to, Harry Potter Ends the War, the full story. Which was not the full story, but it was closer. Kingsley had given a statement. Clear and precise, the way Kingsley did everything. He'd confirmed the neutralization of Voldemort, confirmed the end of hostilities, confirmed that a transitional authority would be announced within 72 hours. He had not mentioned Dumbledore, which Harry had asked him not to, not yet, not until they had a framework for that conversation that didn't produce pure chaos. The Dumbledore matter was going to be harder. Harry had always known this. Dumbledore was not feared the way Voldemort was, he was loved, in the complicated way that institutions are loved, the way authority that presents itself as benevolent is loved, with real feeling mixed with the specific relief of not having to think too hard about whether the authority deserves the love. When the news came out, and it would come out, because McGonagall would tell it truthfully and she was not a person who would be dissuaded from truth by political inconvenience, there was going to be a significant portion of the wizarding world that would be angry. At Harry, specifically. He was prepared for that. At 4 in the afternoon, Remus came back from the ministry with Hermione, both of them carrying takeaway food in paper bags that they'd gotten from a muggle place near the ministry entrance that Hermione had apparently discovered during the day and declared acceptable on the grounds that she was too hungry to go anywhere better. They ate around the mismatched kitchen table, all 5 of them, Harry and Sirius and Remus and Hermione and Neville, who had come back from Hogwarts around noon and reported that the castle was calm and that McGonagall was managing with the focused efficiency of someone who has been handed an enormous problem and recognized it as the thing she was built for. Luna was still at Hogwarts. She had, apparently, decided to stay for a few days. Nobody asked why, because Luna's reasons were always precisely right and rarely explicable in advance. The ministry wants a statement, Hermione said, between bites. From you specifically. Not today, Kingsley thinks tomorrow, give the news cycle time to turn once. What do they want me to say? Harry asked. The truth, Remus said. The whole of it. What the rings are, what you did, why you did it. He paused. Including Dumbledore. I know, Harry said. It's going to be, I know, Harry said again. Neville was quiet through most of dinner, which was his way. He took things in, processed them thoroughly, and spoke when he had something specific to say. He spoke now, setting down his fork. Frank and Alice Longbottom, he said. With Bellatrix stripped, with what happened to her magic, is there anything? I spoke to the healers at St. Mungo's this morning, Hermione said, and her voice had a particular gentleness. The damage to your parents' minds was done by the Cruciatus curse. Removing Bellatrix's magic doesn't reverse that. The harm she did is already, she paused. Neville nodded. He was quiet again. I know, he said. It was simple and complete and asked for nothing, and Harry looked at his friend and felt the specific weight of that, the thing that couldn't be fixed, sitting alongside the enormous thing that had been fixed, both of them real. I'm sorry, Harry said. Don't be, Neville said. You did everything that could be done. What happened to my parents happened 20 years ago. That's not yours to carry. He picked up his fork again. I'll go to St. Mungo's this week. Tell them what happened. A pause. Tell Mom and Dad that she can't hurt anyone anymore. I think they'll understand. Somewhere. The table was quiet. Then Sirius said, with the deliberate timing of a man who knows exactly when levity is the right medicine, incidentally, has anyone told the Wizengamot yet? Because I imagine several of them are having a deeply unpleasant Wednesday evening and I find I don't mind that at all. Hermione made a sound that was trying not to be a laugh. The Wizengamot can manage, Harry said. The Wizengamot can absolutely manage, Remus agreed. Outside the flat window, Edinburgh was going into its evening, the long northern summer dark coming slowly, reluctantly, as if the day wasn't ready to end. The city below was doing what cities do, entirely unaware that 2 floors up, 5 people were eating takeaway around a mismatched table, having saved the world earlier in the week and being mostly hungry and tired and glad about it. Harry ate his food and thought about whales, and a man in a chair, and what it meant to end something completely enough that it couldn't come back. He thought about a boy in an orphanage and a prophecy and all the choices everyone had made since then and the long chain of consequences that had led, through every broken and mistaken and sometimes genuinely courageous link of it, to this table, this food, these people. He thought about Merlin in the knot room, and what the presence had said. Don't confuse love with permission. He thought about what he was going to build. He already had the outline in his head. Had had it for weeks, not fully formed, not detailed, but the shape of it, the intention. A new school, or a reformed one. A ministry that meant something. A wizarding world that didn't run on fear, that didn't paper over its own history, that didn't sacrifice its children on the altar of old men's wars. It was going to be hard. Harder than what he'd done yesterday, in the way that building is always harder than tearing down. But he had time, and he had people, and he had 4 rings on his hand that were still humming, differently now, softer, the hum of instruments at rest, and he was 17 next month and the world was, for the first time in his entire life, genuinely open. He thought, all right. Let's see what we can do with it. More food. Sirius said, which was the best possible question anyone could have asked in that moment. Yes, Harry said. Definitely yes. Chapter 7, The Old Man's Reckoning. 3 days after the stripping, the prophet ran the headline that Harry had been expecting and dreading in equal measure. Dumbledore stripped, Potter removes magic from Britain's greatest wizard, hero or tyrant. It wasn't unexpected. It was, in fact, precisely the headline Hermione had predicted, down to the binary framing in the subheading. She'd written, hero or tyrant, on a piece of parchment 4 days ago and sealed it in an envelope that she now produced from her bag with the quiet satisfaction of someone who takes no pleasure in being right but does appreciate the confirmation of a working model. The story that followed the headline was mostly accurate, which was itself remarkable for the prophet and owed entirely to the fact that McGonagall had given a 2-hour interview to the journalist she considered least likely to sensationalize it, which turned out to be a junior reporter named Archibald Holt who had started at the paper 8 months ago and still believed, with the touching conviction of the newly employed, that facts were the point. McGonagall had given him everything. The Horcrux inside Harry. The arranged sacrifice. The decades of management. The fact that Dumbledore himself had not fought the stripping, had, in the end, said do what you came to do. She had delivered all of it in the precise, unflinching way she did everything, and young Archibald Holt had written it down faithfully and turned it in and nearly had it buried by his editor before Kingsley's office made 2 phone calls and the story ran as written. Harry read it at the kitchen table in Edinburgh at 6 in the morning with a cup of tea and Sirius across from him doing the same. The reaction is going to be split, Sirius said. I know. Half of them are going to call you the best thing to happen to magical Britain in a century. The other half are going to call you a power-hungry child who attacked an old man. I know that too. You're not worried about it. Harry looked at the paper. The photograph on the front page was one taken at some ministry event 2 years ago, him at 14, looking slightly startled, the way all his photographs from that period looked slightly startled, as if the camera had caught him in the middle of being surprised that he was still alive. He'd need a better photograph eventually. He'd need a lot of things eventually. I'm worried about specific things, he said. I'm worried about Fudge, who is still technically minister and is going to try to use this politically. I'm worried about the Dumbledore loyalists in the Wisengamot who are going to push back on Kingsley's transitional authority. I'm worried about the Death Eaters who haven't surrendered yet. There are still 15 unaccounted for. He picked up his tea. I'm not worried about what people think of me. Sirius looked at him over his own cup. James would have been worried about what people thought of him. I know, Harry said. I'm not James. We've established that, Sirius agreed. It still surprises me sometimes. Outside the window, Edinburgh was doing its morning thing, grey and determined and slightly damp, and the day organized itself around what needed to happen. The statement was scheduled for 11 a.m. Not a press conference in the ministry's public atrium, which was Fudge's suggestion and therefore the wrong suggestion. Kingsley had arranged a room on the 4th floor, a meeting room, not a staging area, with chairs in a rough circle rather than a podium at the front. Harry had asked for this specifically. He wanted to talk, not perform. He arrived at 10:40 with Hermione, who had a folder of notes she didn't open. Her presence itself was the note, the reminder that everything he was about to say had been thought through from every angle and was as right as it could be made. The room held 20 people by 11 o'clock. 6 journalists, including young Archibald Holt who looked slightly terrified by his own presence there. 5 ministry officials. For members of the Wisingamot, including Augusta Longbottom, who had come in Neville's company and sat in the front row with the air of a woman who has been waiting for something like this for 30 years and is going to pay attention. Kingsley behind a small table to one side. McGonagall, who had come down from Hogwarts and was seated to Harry's left. And, because nothing in Harry's life was entirely straightforward, Cornelius Fudge in the back corner with the expression of a man attending his own professional funeral and trying to look like he'd planned it. Harry sat. No podium. No prepared remarks. He put his hands on his knees and looked at the room and began. He talked for 40 minutes. He told them everything that mattered. The Gringotts visit, the inheritance, the rings and what they were. What he'd felt when he put them on, not the specific mechanics of the magical experience, but the fact of it, what it had told him and how. He talked about the Horcrux inside him, clearly and without drama, and he watched the room respond to that, watched the journalist's quills stop for a second, watched Augusta Longbottom's jaw tighten once and then release. He talked about the decision. Not as a heroic narrative, he'd asked Hermione specifically to push back on him if his draft ran toward that tone, and she had, twice. He talked about it as a choice. A choice made with full information by someone who was capable of making it, who rejected the premise that the choice belonged to anyone else. He said, I was a tool in 2 people's wars before I could walk. I stopped being a tool. That's the entire story. He talked about Voldemort. The stripping, what it had involved, what Tom Riddle was now and where he was. He talked about this part carefully because he knew it was the most politically volatile. Some people would consider his decision not to imprison Riddle publicly as insufficient, and those people were not wrong from their own framework, and he didn't condescend to their framework. He said, I made the decision I thought was right for what comes next, not for what feels right today. Tom Riddle without magic is not a threat. Tom Riddle as a symbol in Azkaban is a wound that never closes. I chose to close the wound. He talked about Dumbledore last. This was the hardest part, and he didn't soften it. He laid it out plainly, what Dumbledore had known and when, what he had arranged, what the management of Harry's life had looked like from the inside of it, what it had cost. He was not brutal about it, he was precise, which was harder than brutal. He said, Albus Dumbledore is one of the most extraordinary human beings I have ever encountered. He has done more genuine good in his lifetime than I am likely to do in mine. None of that changes what he did or justifies how he used me and others. Both things are true. I'm not interested in making him a villain because that would let the rest of us off the hook for not asking the right questions sooner. He paused. The wizarding world gave Dumbledore the power to do what he did because we needed someone to be in charge and we stopped checking whether the person in charge was accountable. That's the problem I'm interested in fixing. The room was very quiet. Then Augusta Longbottom said, from the front row, what happens now? Harry looked at her. Neville's grandmother was a formidable woman, tall, straight-backed, with sharp eyes that had seen too much of the wizarding world's failures and had never stopped being angry about them. Harry liked her enormously. That's the part one need help with, he said. From people who know how institutions work. How to build things that last and aren't just one person's framework. He looked around the room. I can strip magic. I can end things. I'm not interested in running the world, I'm interested in making sure nobody can run it the way it's been run for the past 60 years. He paused. So if you came here expecting to be told what to do next, you came to the wrong meeting. I'm here to talk, not to dictate. The conversation that followed was not orderly and was not comfortable and went 40 minutes over its scheduled time and was, Harry thought afterwards, the most genuinely useful thing he'd participated in since the whole situation began. He went to see Dumbledore that afternoon. Not because the statement required it, not because anyone expected it. Hermione had raised an eyebrow when he told her his plan, an eyebrow that contained a nuanced argument about timing and political optics, and he'd listened to the argument and then gone anyway. He apparat to the Hogwarts gates and walked up the grounds in the afternoon light, which was doing something particularly good that day, low and golden and casting long shadows across the grass, the kind of light that made Hogwarts look like exactly what it had been to him for 5 years, home. Strange, complicated, dangerous, beloved home. McGonagall had told him this morning that Dumbledore was still in the castle. He had nowhere to go, practically. The man had lived in these walls for most of his adult life, and the castle was as much his as it was anyone's, and McGonagall had made it quietly clear that he was welcome to stay as long as he wished, because she was not going to perform his ejection for anyone's satisfaction. Harry agreed with this completely. He found him in the library. Not the main library, the smaller one adjoining the headmaster's suite, which contained the personal collection Dumbledore had assembled over 60 years of scholarship. He was sitting at a table near the window in an armchair that had the look of a piece of furniture that had been in exactly this position for decades, with a book open in his lap and his half-moon spectacles on, the same spectacles he'd turned in his hands 3 nights ago, now simply what they were, reading glasses rather than a habit of authority. He looked up when Harry came in. His expression settled into something that Harry could now read clearly, without the ambient power creating interference. It was what it had always been, underneath everything else, genuine affection. The look of someone who sees a person they care about and cannot help responding to the seeing. "Harry," he said. "Sit down." "Thank you," Harry said, and took the chair across from him. For a moment they were simply two people in a room. The afternoon light came through the window between them, and the library had that particular quality of rooms full of books, the specific weight of accumulated thought, the sense of being in a place that has been a thinking place for a long time. Dumbledore closed his book. He looked at Harry with the full attention he'd always given him, which had lost none of its quality without the magic behind it. The intelligence and the care were entirely intact, and they were, Harry realized, actually more visible now. Before, the power had been a kind of weather that everything else existed inside. Without it, the man himself was clearer. "I've been reading," Dumbledore said. He held up the book. It was a Muggle one, Harry noticed, a history of the Second World War. "I've been a poor reader of Muggle history," he said, with a dryness that was very like himself. "I always had the rather arrogant conviction that magical history was where the lessons lived. And now," Harry said. "And now I find that the pattern is entirely familiar." He set the book aside. Power. Certainty. The absolute conviction of the person holding both that the cost is justified by the outcome. He looked at the window. "I have been thinking a great deal since Wednesday about how a man becomes the thing he was trying to prevent." "Were you trying to prevent Voldemort?" Harry asked. "Or were you trying to control the situation that contained him?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "That," he said, "is an extremely good question, and I am ashamed that I need to think about it." "Take your time," Harry said. Another silence. Through the window, the grounds were doing their golden afternoon thing, and somewhere distant a bird was making a sound in the trees near the lake, and Hogwarts was itself around them, that deep architectural presence that Harry had always found, even in the worst moments, steadying. "Both," Dumbledore said finally. "Which is perhaps worse than either alone. I wanted to prevent what he was, and I wanted to be the one who prevented it, and I allowed the second desire to consume the first until the outcome I was working toward was not a safer world but my version of a safer world." He looked at Harry. "Do you understand the difference?" "Yes," Harry said. "It's the same difference as between helping someone and managing them." Dumbledore blinked. Then something moved across his face, not quite a wince, but the response of a man receiving a precise hit. "Yes," he said. Precisely that. Harry leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, the same posture he'd sat in across from Tom Riddle 2 days ago, the posture of genuine conversation rather than confrontation. He had come here with a specific purpose, and the purpose was not to wound. He'd done what he'd come to do 3 nights ago in the Transfiguration classroom. This was something else. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Ask," Dumbledore said. "What do I do with the knowledge? About the prophecy. About what you planned. About what you knew." He watched the old man's face. "Not what to do with it publicly, I've dealt with that. What do I do with it personally? Because you're the closest thing to a mentor I've ever had, which is a strange thing to say given everything, and I find that I still," he stopped. "I don't want to carry this as hatred. I know what hatred does to people. I've spent 5 years watching what Voldemort's hatred of himself did to everything around him." Dumbledore was very still. "But I also don't want to paper over it," Harry said. "I don't want to call it fine when it isn't. I don't want to be the bigger man in the way that means pretending things weren't what they were." He paused. "So how do I hold it? Both things, what you are and what you did, without letting either one cancel out the other?" The question sat in the room. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time with an expression that Harry could not entirely read and didn't try to. Then the old man said, very quietly, "You are asking me how to forgive someone while remaining clear-eyed about their failures." "Yes," Harry said. "I'm afraid," Dumbledore said, "that I am the last person qualified to instruct you in forgiveness. I have not been very good at it myself." He looked at his hands, old hands, without the faint ambient glow that magical power gives to even resting hands. Just hands. "I never forgave Gellert Grindelwald. I told myself for decades that I had, but the truth is I buried the grief of him under an enormous amount of purposeful work and called the burying forgiveness." A pause. "The work was genuine. The forgiveness was not. Then what are you actually saying?" Harry asked. "I'm saying," Dumbledore said slowly, "that I cannot give you a map for this. I can tell you that what you're attempting, the clear-eyed holding of both things, is rarer and harder than most people manage. Most people choose one. They either excuse or they condemn. The capacity to hold both without resolution, indefinitely, as an ongoing act of honest attention," he paused, "that is an extraordinarily mature thing to ask of yourself at 17. 16, Harry said. 17 next month." The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. "Of course." He looked at Harry with the full weight of it, the affection and the guilt and the genuine respect, all of it present and none of it performing. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you are already doing it. You came here. You're asking the question instead of avoiding it. That is the thing itself." Harry sat with that. "I'm going to be angry at you for a long time," he said. "I want to be honest about that." "I know," Dumbledore said. "I would think less of you if you weren't. And I'm going to keep coming here. If you don't mind." Harry paused, surprised at himself slightly. "There are things I want to understand. About what you were trying to build and where it went wrong. About magical history. About a lot of things." He looked at the walls of books. "You know more than anyone alive. You just shouldn't have been the only one making decisions based on it." Dumbledore looked at him for a moment that held a great deal. Then, "Would very much like that," he said. "The visits." They sat in companionable silence for a while, which was strange. It should not have been comfortable, given everything, and yet it was, in the specific way of two people who have been through something true together and found, on the other side of it, that they are still able to be in the same room. "Tell me about your plans," Dumbledore said eventually. "What you intend to build. I would like to listen." So Harry told him. McGonagall found them there at 5 o'clock, still talking, the afternoon gone to evening around them without either of them noticing, the library's ambient quiet filling the gaps between sentences and holding the conversation in its proper shape. She stood in the doorway for a moment before either of them looked up, and her face in that moment was the most unguarded Harry had ever seen it, something that was grief and relief and love and anger all at once, all of it belonging to the same long complicated story, all of it real. Then she composed herself and came in and said, "If either of you want dinner, Mipsy has been holding the food since 4:30 and is developing a pointed opinion about it." "Mipsy always has a pointed opinion," Dumbledore said. "She's not wrong," McGonagall said. And she looked at Harry and the look said, very precisely and without a word, "Good. This is right. Well done." Harry stood. He looked at Dumbledore, old man in an armchair, reading glasses on his nose, entirely without magic, entirely himself. "Same time next week?" Harry said. Dumbledore looked mildly startled, and then he said, "I'll be here." The week that followed was, in its way, the strangest of everything. Not the dramatic strangeness of the weeks before, no vaults, no Yorkshire fields, no history-pivoting acts of will. The strangeness of aftermath. The strangeness of the world reorganizing itself around a new center of gravity and everyone having to find their footing on the shifted ground. Fudge resigned on Friday, which had been inevitable since Tuesday and was therefore not a surprise but was an event that required managing regardless. Kingsley's transitional authority was formally established on Saturday with a Wisengamot vote that was not unanimous but was decisive, 23-9, with Augusta Longbottom giving a speech in favor that Harry was told was so precise and unflinching that 2 Wisengamot members who had voted against thought about requesting a recount. The Death Eater accounting reached its conclusion by Sunday. All 37 active Death Eaters either surrendered or were located and detained by the expanded Auror force that Kingsley had reorganized with startling efficiency. The trials would take months. The Transitional Authority had already established a new judicial panel to handle them, one that included Muggle-born representation for the first time in the Wisengamot's history, which produced a quantity of outrage from a specific demographic that Harry found useful as a diagnostic. The people who were loudest about that particular change were exactly the people whose opinions required the most careful watching going forward. Neville went to St. Mungo's on Monday. He went alone, which was his choice, and Harry respected it completely. He came back in the evening to the flat. They'd all been staying in Edinburgh, a comfortable chaos of people in a space that had been designed for 1 and was managing 5 with the goodwill that comes from everyone involved understanding that the arrangement was temporary and meaningful. And he sat at the kitchen table and Sirius put food in front of him and for a while nobody asked anything. Then Neville said, quietly, "I told them it was over. Bellatrix couldn't hurt anyone anymore. Mum took my hand." He stopped. "She always takes my hand. But today she held it tighter. And she looked at me." He looked at the table. Really looked. Just for a second. She came back a little. Nobody said anything. Sirius reached across and put a hand on Neville's arm, briefly, and Neville nodded, and that was exactly right. Harry went for a walk that evening while the others were still at the table. Edinburgh in the late evening had become familiar to him in the past weeks, the specific quality of the streetlights on the stone, the particular cold of the air coming off the castle hill, the way the city felt like itself in a way that cities feel when you've spent enough time in them to know their rhythms. He walked without a destination, hands in his pockets, rings warm and quiet on his hand. He thought about Neville's mother looking at her son. Really looking. Just for a second, and because the thing that had broken their family 60 years ago no longer existed in the world. He thought about the specific weight of that, not the dramatic sweep of the war's ending, not the political architecture of the transition, not any of the large-scale consequential things that Hermione was already building frameworks for. Just a woman in a hospital bed taking her son's hand with purpose for the first time in 16 years. That, he thought, was the actual answer to Dumbledore's question. Will you build something? He already had. And it looked like this. A woman's hand tightening on her son's. Not because of power or strategy or perfectly executed plans, but because something terrible had been removed from the world and the space it left was immediately filling with what had been waiting to grow there. He stopped walking and stood on a street corner in Edinburgh with the night air around him and let himself feel it, not guardedly, not partially, all the way through. The thing that was bigger than relief and smaller than happiness and more durable than either. The thing that arrived when you had done what needed doing and survived the doing of it and found that the world on the other side was, in fact, still there. His phone buzzed. "Hermione, where are you? Sirius is teaching Neville to play poker with chocolate frog cards and it's going badly for everyone. Come back." He smiled at his phone in an Edinburgh street at 9:30 in the evening and turned and walked back to the flat. 3 days later, the Prophet ran a different kind of story. Not a front-page headline, which surprised Harry until Hermione pointed out that Archibald Holt had specifically placed it on page 3 because he understood, instinctively, that the story would land harder without the trumpet of the front page. It was about the Department of Magical Law Enforcement's new protocols for Muggle-born registration, specifically, the cancellation of those protocols. One paragraph, clean and factual. And below it, a list of names. Muggle-born witches and wizards who had been in hiding for the past year, who had been located by the Transitional Authority and informed they could come home. There were 47 names. Harry read the list and felt the weight of each name as a specific, individual thing, each name a person a life interrupted, each life about to resume something it had been forced to pause. He thought about his mother's name. Lily Evans, Muggle-born. He thought about what she would have been in a world that hadn't spent 60 years making itself hostile to people like her. He thought about what he was going to build, and he thought, it starts here. With lists getting shorter, not longer. "What are you thinking?" Hermione asked. She was at the desk with her own copy of the paper and her eyes had the brightness they got when she was moved by something and was deciding whether to be moved visibly. "I'm thinking about your name," Harry said. "On that list. If things had gone differently." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, they didn't go differently." "No," he said. "They didn't." She looked at him with the expression she'd been working on naming since Gringotts and had, he now understood, fully named somewhere around Yorkshire. It was the expression of someone who has seen a person become completely themselves and recognizes it as the thing they were watching for all along. "We have a meeting with Kingsley in an hour," she said. "I know," Harry said. "I'll be ready." He got up. He put on his jacket. He checked the rings on his right hand, all 4 of them, silver and black and bone white and bronze, humming their settled chord, and went to the door and held it open for Hermione, who picked up her folder and walked through it, already thinking 3 steps ahead, which was exactly right. Outside, Edinburgh was doing something that wasn't quite autumn yet but was practicing for it, the air holding a first edge of something cooler and more purposeful, and Harry pulled his jacket a little closer and walked forward into whatever came next. Behind him in the flat, Sirius was watering his plants. Through the window Harry could see him doing it with the absorbed care of a man who has recently discovered that he enjoys keeping things alive, and finds the discovery to his liking. The plant on the far left was doing something green and determined, reaching toward the window. Harry kept walking. Chapter 8, After the King. 6 months after the stripping, Harry Potter turned 17 in a garden. Not his garden, he didn't have one yet, though Sirius had been making pointed remarks about properties in the Lake District with the specific energy of a man who wants something and has decided the most effective approach is strategic hinting. The garden belonged to Augusta Longbottom, who had invited approximately 40 people to what she described in her written invitations as a small gathering and had meant, by this, 40 people and a catered dinner and a marquee in the back garden that was charmed against rain but not against the particular warmth of a late September evening that had decided to be generous. Harry arrived through the flow with Sirius and Remus and found Hermione already there. Predictably, she'd come an hour early to help Augusta set up, which Augusta had accepted with the air of someone who recognized a genuinely useful offer and was not going to diminish it with false protest. Neville was in the garden with his grandmother's magical plants, which occupied one entire flower bed and were doing things that ordinary plants were not supposed to do and Augusta considered a point of pride. Luna was sitting on the garden wall with her legs dangling, wearing robes the color of a clear sky and reading upside down, which Harry had concluded some time ago was less an affectation and more simply how her reading worked. "Happy birthday," she said, without looking up. How did you know I was here? Harry asked. The garden knew, she said, which was either genuinely true in some Luna-adjacent way or entirely invented, and either way was the correct answer. It was a good evening. The kind of evening that doesn't announce itself as a good evening, doesn't have music swelling at the right moments or light hitting things dramatically, but builds itself quietly out of accumulated small right things. Food that was excellent. People who were genuinely glad to be together. Conversations that moved between laughter and seriousness with the natural ease that requires everyone present to actually know each other. Kingsley came, which surprised Harry slightly and then didn't. Kingsley had developed the habit of appearing at events in ways that looked casual and weren't, because Kingsley understood that politics happened in gardens as well as offices, and also, Harry suspected, because he genuinely liked the company. He arrived without aides, without ministry formality, and sat with Augusta Longbottom for 40 minutes in what appeared to be an extremely serious conversation about transfiguration regulation that was somehow also about Wisengamot reform, because Augusta Longbottom talked about everything through the lens of everything else. Remus spent most of the evening near the food table, which Harry understood as his version of comfort. Remus Lupin's relationship with abundance had been complicated for most of his life, and he had been, since the flat in Edinburgh, quietly and methodically normalizing it, one meal at a time. Sirius mingled. He was good at it. The Black family had bred him for rooms, even if the Blacks had intended a different kind of room than this one, and his particular social warmth, the thing that survived Azkaban intact because it was too fundamental to be eaten away, filled the garden in a way that made it feel larger than its actual dimensions. McGonagall arrived at 8 with a small wrapped package and the expression of someone attending a party under a mild but genuine protest against the concept of parties, which everyone understood was simply how she expressed that she was pleased to be there. Harry was standing near the garden wall with a glass of something cold when she found him. "Professor," he said. "Headmistress," she said, with a slight emphasis, and he caught the weight of it. "That's been confirmed." "This morning," she said. "The board voted. It was not unanimous, but it was sufficient." She said this with the dry precision of someone who considers sufficiency adequate and prefers it to performance. She handed him the package. "Don't open it here. It's not that kind of gift." He took it. It had weight. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me. I've been the deputy headmistress of that school for 23 years and I intend to be a significantly better headmistress than I was a deputy." She looked at him steadily. "I was complicit, Harry. Not through action, through silence. Through choosing to trust the framework rather than asking whether the framework was right." She paused. "I am old enough to know better and I should have known better sooner." "You know better now," Harry said. "Yes. Which is the minimum requirement, not the achievement." She looked at the garden, at the people. "Albus sends his regards." "He didn't, he thought it wouldn't be appropriate to come." "He should have come," Harry said. "I would have wanted him to." McGonagall looked at him. "I'll tell him that." "Please do," Harry said. "And tell him I'll be by on Thursday." The visits had continued. Every Thursday afternoon, without fail, sometimes long and conversational and ranging across history and theory and the mechanics of magical governance, sometimes shorter and quieter, the two of them in the library with separate books that occasionally intersected. Dumbledore was writing something. Harry had seen the pages accumulating on the corner of the desk, and he'd asked once what it was, and Dumbledore had said, "An account of everything. For whoever finds it useful. Not a defense, simply a record." Harry had nodded and let it be, because that was the right thing and they both knew it. The next morning Harry was up before 6 and at the new offices by 7. The offices were on the 3rd floor of a building in Diagon Alley, above a bookshop that Hermione had immediately approved of and a wand-maker's that had been there since 1842 and smelled of cedar and old wood and something electrical. The building itself was mid-sized, recently refurbished, and had been acquired through the Potter estate 3 months ago when it became clear that the work they were doing required a permanent base that wasn't Sirius's flat or Kingsley's ministry office. The plaque on the door read, Magical Britain Reform Commission, Independent Advisory Body. It was not a dramatic name. Hermione had vetoed 3 more dramatic alternatives on the grounds that anything that sounded powerful would immediately attract the wrong kind of attention. Harry had agreed. Neville had suggested they just call it the office, and everyone had taken this more seriously than he'd expected. Inside it was organized in the particular way of a place that has a lot of work happening in it and has accepted the work as the primary organizing principle rather than appearance. Bookshelves with Hermione's cataloging system. 3 large work tables. A smaller room off the main space where Harry worked when he needed quiet. A kitchen that Sirius had furnished with the same enthusiasm he'd brought to the Edinburgh flat and that contained, inexplicably, an espresso machine that he'd acquired from a Muggle shop and figured out by reading the manual twice. The commission was not Harry's creation, technically. That was deliberate. He had been extremely careful about what he put his name to and what he supported without leading, because he understood the difference between building something good and building something around himself. The commission had been Hermione's architecture, Augusta Longbottom's institutional credibility, Kingsley's political scaffolding, and a dozen other people's specific expertise and genuine commitment. Harry was a member of it. He was not its face. This was the thing people found hardest to understand about what he'd done in the months since the stripping. They expected him to claim the space the stripping had created. To step into the authority vacuum. To become the thing that Voldemort and Dumbledore had both vacated. The Daily Prophet had run 3 separate opinion pieces in the first month asking why Harry Potter wasn't running for minister, the subtext being that he obviously should be. He never responded to them directly. He let Hermione respond, and Hermione's responses were so thorough and precisely reasoned that the opinion writers usually found themselves defending a position they no longer entirely believed in. He had said it once, in the statement, and he had meant it completely: I'm not interested in running the world. He was interested in making sure the world had better structures, better safeguards, better questions built into its institutions so that the next person who tried to arrange it around their own framework would encounter meaningful friction. That was different from ruling. That was, in fact, the opposite of ruling. He sat at his desk now with the case files for the ongoing Death Eater trials spread in front of him. He was not a barrister, he would never be a barrister. He had neither the training nor the temperament for the specific discipline of legal argument, but he was an advisory witness for several of the trials, and the commission had standing to submit recommendations to the new judicial panel on sentencing philosophy, and he took that seriously. The Lestrange file was on top. Bellatrix Lestrange without magic was, Harry had been trying to find the right word for months, and had settled on diminished, not in the sense of less frightening but in the sense of less total. She was still Bellatrix. The mind was still there, the history was still there, the specific pattern of a person who had built their entire identity around the idea of devotion to something larger than themselves and had chosen the worst possible object for that devotion. Without magic, she was simply a woman in her 50s in a ministry-holding cell who had done terrible things and was going to be accountable for them. The trial was scheduled for November. Harry had submitted a recommendation against execution, which he knew was going to be controversial and had been anyway, and in favor of permanent non-magical detention in a facility that had been in development since the transitional authority began, not Azkaban, which was being decommissioned, but something new. A place without Dementors, without the specific cruelty of Azkaban's design. A place that simply held people away from the world they damaged, without torturing them for the pleasure of the institution. He didn't think Bellatrix deserved mercy. He thought building a better world required better answers than the ones the old world had given, and that the question of what to do with people who had done terrible things was one of the questions you had to answer well if you meant what you said about building something better. He sat with the discomfort of that and let the discomfort be what it was, which was the feeling of doing the right thing rather than the satisfying thing. He was halfway through the file when the office door opened and Hermione came in with 2 cups from the espresso machine and her own folder under her arm, which he recognized as the Education Reform folder because it was the thickest one. "Happy birthday, 1 day late," she said, setting a cup on his desk. "You said it at the party. I'm saying it again. It was your birthday." She sat in the chair across from his desk, The chair was technically for meetings but had become functionally hers in the way that furniture accommodates itself to the people who use it most. "How are you?" It was the question she asked every morning, not as a formality but as a genuine inquiry, and he'd learned to answer it genuinely in return, which was itself something he'd had to learn, the habit of honest self-reporting that replaced the childhood habit of fine as a default. "Good," he said. "Actually good. The party it was really good." Augusta outdid herself. "She always does." He paused. McGonagall confirmed the headmistress appointment. Hermione looked up from her folder. A pause. "Good," she said, with a warmth that was more than the word. "That's really good." She paused again. "The school's going to be different." "Yes," Harry said. McGonagall had already, in the 6 weeks since the stripping became public knowledge and the school's governance had come under review, begun a quiet but comprehensive reorientation of what Hogwarts was. The curriculum review was on the Commission's agenda for November. The pastoral care structures, the ones that had allowed Harry Potter to return to the Dursleys every summer for 5 years without a single formal inquiry, were being rebuilt from the ground up. The process for identifying and supporting Muggle-born students who came from families without any context for the magical world was being redesigned with the specific input of 3 adult Muggle-born witches and wizards who had lived through the inadequacy of the current system. Hermione was one of the 3. She had sat in that meeting and spoken with a clarity and a specificity that Harry had watched from across the table with the quiet pride of knowing someone very well and seeing them be completely themselves in a consequential moment. "The Hogwarts thing," Harry said. "I've been thinking." "About what specifically?" "Going back. For 7th year." He watched her face process this. "Not because I have to. Because I want to." He paused. "There's still things I want to learn. Properly. Without a war running alongside the lessons." Hermione was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet was the particular quality of someone reorganizing their internal model of something. "I'd been wondering," she said. "Were you going to go back?" "I was waiting to see what you decided," she said, which was honest and slightly surprising. Hermione Granger waiting for someone else's decision before making her own was not her natural mode. She caught his expression. "Don't read too much into it. I have plenty of opinions of my own. But this one specifically, I wanted to know what it looked like to you, and then I'd know what it looked like to me." "It looks like the right thing," Harry said. "Then yes," she said. "Me too." She opened her folder and they began to work. At noon Neville came in with lunch from the sandwich place 2 streets over that he'd been investigating systematically since August and had recently declared to have the best bread in Diagon Alley, which he said with the authority of someone who had eaten extensively in the field and formed a defensible opinion. He sat on the edge of the work table and unwrapped his own sandwich and said, "St. Mungo's called this morning." Harry looked up. "Mum said my name," Neville said. Out loud. Clearly. He looked at his sandwich for a moment. "The healers think, they're being careful about it, they don't want to promise anything, but they think the deterioration has stopped. Maybe reversed. They've been monitoring the pattern for 2 months and it's moving the right direction." He looked up. "They've never said that before. In 16 years, they've never said the pattern was moving the right direction." The room was very quiet. "Neville," Hermione said. "I know," he said. "I know. I'm not, I know it's early. I know it might not," he stopped. Started again. "But she said my name. She looked at me and she said Neville. That's never happened before." Harry got up and crossed to the work table and sat next to him. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, and Neville sat there, and after a moment Neville took a large deliberate bite of his sandwich with the specific energy of someone choosing to be all right, which was one of the bravest things Harry had ever seen anyone do. "The Cruciatus," Harry said carefully. "The reversal. Is it, do they know why it's happening now?" "The senior healer has a theory," Neville said. "She thinks, this is going to sound strange, she thinks that Bellatrix being stripped didn't just remove her magic. It severed something. Some ongoing connection between the curse and the caster. The cruciatus, cast with that much sustained intensity, leaves something. Not visible magic, not the kind the instruments usually pick up, but something. And when the source is removed entirely, he paused, maybe it starts to heal. Harry thought about the Peverell ring. The way it addressed anchors, tethers, the connections between a magical act and its source. He thought about what Ragnarok had said, months ago, in the Gringotts conference room, the stripping would dissolve the anchors. He had been thinking Horcruxes. He had not been thinking about a hospital room in London where a woman had been frozen in damage for 16 years. I should have thought of that, he said. You couldn't have known, Neville said. I should have thought about the broader implications of severing, Harry, Neville said, with the particular tone he developed in the past 6 months of not allowing Harry to collect responsibilities that weren't his, which was a tone that Hermione had praised specifically on 2 separate occasions. You stopped a war. You can't also have predicted every downstream consequence of the mechanism you used to stop it. That's not how things work. He's right, Hermione said, from behind her folder. You're both ganging up on me, Harry said. We do that when you're being unreasonable about the limits of what one person can be expected to foresee, Hermione said. It's a service we provide. Neville finished his sandwich. I'm going back tonight. To St. Mungo's. He paused. I'm going to bring something for Dad. He always likes the wrappers from Sweets. I've been bringing them for years. He collects them. He said this the way he always said things about his parents, with a simple directness that held the grief and the love together without separating them into tidier compartments. I want to be there if he says something too. Of course, Harry said. That afternoon Harry had a meeting he'd been putting off for 3 weeks, which Hermione had finally scheduled around his resistance with the efficiency of someone who has decided that waiting for voluntary cooperation is no longer a viable strategy. The meeting was with Draco Malfoy. Lucius Malfoy was in the new facility, awaiting trial. Narcissa Malfoy had retreated to the family estate and had been notably silent, which Harry took as the particular silence of a woman who had spent years in proximity to disaster and had become expert at not drawing attention to herself. Draco himself was, Harry wasn't entirely sure what Draco was, which was why the meeting had taken him 3 weeks to agree to. He came alone. Draco came alone. They met in a small room in the commission office that Harry used for meetings that needed to be private, and they sat across from each other in the 2 chairs that were specifically not positioned for confrontation, which was an intentional choice of Hermione's that Harry had initially found slightly too deliberate and had come to appreciate. Draco looked tired. Not defeated, Draco had a core of something too stubborn to be defeated. Harry had always known this even when he'd been too busy being antagonistic toward it to acknowledge it, but tired in the way of someone who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and has recently put it down and is not yet sure how to stand without the weight. You look terrible, Harry said. Thank you, Draco said. You look annoyingly well. I had a good summer. Yes, I heard. A pause. All of Britain heard. Several times. He looked at the table. I want to talk about the trials. I know, Harry said. That's why you're here. My father, your father is going to stand trial for his involvement in Voldemort's campaign, Harry said. That's happening. I won't intervene in that and I won't misrepresent it. Draco's jaw tightened once. I know. I'm not asking you to. He looked up. I'm asking what happens to my mother. She's done nothing that rises to the threshold of, I know, Harry said. She's not under investigation. She's not a person of interest to the Commission or to the Auror Office. The blood status laws that she technically benefited from are being repealed and the repeal is not retroactive in the sense of criminal liability. We're not going to prosecute people for having been advantaged by an unjust system, we're going to dismantle the system. He paused. Your mother is not Bellatrix. She's not Lucius. She made specific choices at a specific moment that mattered. He held Draco's gaze. She lied to Voldemort's face to protect me. In the forest. I haven't forgotten that. Draco was quiet for a moment. She didn't do it for you, he said. I know, Harry said. She did it for you. Which makes it more right, not less. Another silence. Something moved in Draco's face that was not quite vulnerability but was in the neighborhood of it. What do you want from me? Draco asked. You must want something. You're not the type to arrange a meeting purely to be generous. Harry looked at him. Across 6 years of schoolboy animosity and a war and all its particular damage, he looked at Draco Malfoy and found, with mild surprise that he supposed he should have expected by now, a person. Specifically, a person who was intelligent, and who had been given every advantage except the most important one, which was the opportunity to choose who to be rather than being assigned a role at birth and raised into it as if the assignment were the person. A person who was, Harry thought, genuinely trying to figure out what came next now that the framework that had defined him for 17 years had been removed. I want you to be part of what we're building, Harry said. Draco stared at him. Not as a gesture, Harry said. Not as a statement about forgiveness or reconciliation or whatever the prophet would make it. Because you're smart and you understand the old system from the inside in ways most of the people working on the new one don't, and that understanding is genuinely useful if it's used well. He paused. And because you're going to spend the rest of your life being the son of Lucius Malfoy and I think you'd rather also be something else. Draco was very still. You're serious. Entirely. Most people in your position would. I'm not most people in my position, Harry said. As has been noted. Draco looked at the rings on Harry's right hand. He'd been not looking at them for the whole meeting with the specific not looking of someone who is very aware of something. What are those, actually? Specifically. For bloodline inheritance rings with convergent properties, Harry said. Technically the most powerful magical instruments in recorded history, but they hum pretty quietly most of the time. You wear them on your right hand. Yes. Why the right? Because my wand hand is my left, Harry said, and it seemed important to keep them separate. The wand does what I tell it. The rings do what I mean. He paused. There's a difference. Draco looked at him for a long moment. Then, with the specific careful quality of someone testing a new thing, all right, he said. Tell me what you need. The evening arrived slowly, the way October evenings do, not suddenly dark but gradually less light, the quality of the air shifting by degrees towards something crisper and more considered. Harry left the commission offices at 7 and walked, because he'd been sitting most of the day and walking was how he processed things. He walked through Diagon Alley, which was different than it had been a year ago. The difference was not architectural, the same buildings, the same shop fronts, the same general arrangement of a commercial street that had been exactly itself for several hundred years. The difference was in the people. Not a dramatic difference, not happiness replacing fear in some obvious visible way, but something subtler and more real, a quality of ease in how people moved through the space. People stopping to talk without the particular awareness of surveillance that had been present last year. A group of children outside the Quidditch supply shop arguing about broom models with the total absorption of children who are doing what children are supposed to be doing. A Muggle-born couple, young, looking in the window of a bookshop without the careful self-consciousness of people checking whether they're allowed to be there. Harry walked through all of it and felt it as a specific and physical thing, the way the rings allowed him to feel the ambient magic of a place, not power now, but texture, and the texture was different. Lighter. More itself. He ended up, without entirely planning to, at the Leaky Cauldron, which was doing its usual evening business and had the warmth of a place that has been providing warmth to people for centuries and intends to continue. He sat at the bar and Tom the barkeep put a butterbeer in front of him without being asked, because Tom had been doing this since Harry was 11 and saw no reason to change the protocol. He sat and drank his butterbeer and thought about the year behind him and the year ahead. The rings hummed on his hand. Quieter than they'd ever been and somehow more present for the quietness, like a voice you can only hear properly when the noise around it stops. He had spent a lot of time thinking about what they were, these past months. Not technically, he understood the technical dimension well enough. But what they meant. What it meant to carry 4 bloodlines and 4 pieces of metal on your right hand and to have used them, once, absolutely, and to walk around afterward in the ordinary world with them still there. He thought about Gringotts Peverell at the crossroads. The Deathly Hallows were never meant to make a man a master of death. They were meant to make a man the master of himself. He thought about Merlin in the knot room. Don't confuse love with permission. He thought about his mother's letter. It belongs to you. It was always yours. He thought about what he was, which was something that still didn't have a clean name and probably didn't need one. The convergence heir, technically. The last living person to carry all 4 bloodlines. The boy who'd walked into 2 strongholds in one afternoon and come out having ended a war. Also a person who was going back to school in September because there were things he still wanted to learn. Also a person who was going to eat a second butterbeer and then go back to the flat and find out whether Sirius had successfully taught anyone poker or whether the chocolate frog cards had defeated them all again. His phone buzzed. Sirius, Luna is here. She says she knew you'd come home by 8. I said no chance. Put a galleon on it. What time are you getting here? Harry looked at the time. 7:52. He put the butterbeer down, stood up, and left the leaky cauldron. He was through the flue at 7:59. Sirius was standing in the middle of the flat with an expression that was simultaneously delighted and indignant, holding a galleon. Luna was on the sofa with her legs folded and her quibbler open and the specific serenity of someone who is never surprised by being right. 1 minute to spare, Sirius said. I walked fast, Harry said. She knew, Sirius said, gesturing at Luna. I know lots of things, Luna said, without looking up. Hermione was at the kitchen table with her laptop, a Muggle computer she'd been using for commission work because she'd concluded that the Wizarding World's administrative infrastructure needed to stop being entirely owl-based, and she looked up when Harry came in and said, Neville called. His father smiled at him tonight. Properly. She paused. He's not leaving the hospital. He said he'll be back tomorrow. Harry stopped in the middle of the room. Yeah, he said. Okay. Okay, Hermione agreed. Remus was in the kitchen making tea, which was his default activity in any situation that contained strong feelings, because tea was something you could do with your hands while feelings were happening and the doing of it was itself a form of steadiness. He poured Harry a cup without asking and handed it over the counter. Happy birthday, he said. 1 day late. You said it at the party, Harry said. I'm saying it again, Remus said, which was exactly what Hermione had said that morning, which meant either they'd coordinated it or it was simply the thing people who loved you did, kept saying it, finding new moments to put it in because once wasn't enough. Harry sat down in the leather armchair. The one that had been Sirius's since Edinburgh, that he'd sat in across from Sirius on the very first night he'd come through that fire and found his godfather alive on the other side of something impossible. The flat around him was warm and slightly crowded with the people he'd chosen and who had chosen him and everything they'd built together in the past months, the notes on the table, the plants on the windowsill reaching toward the light, the espresso machine Sirius was very proud of, Luna's quibbler, Hermione's laptop, Remus's perpetual tea. The rings hummed on his right hand. Not preparatory, not amplifying, not pointed at anything. Just themselves. 4 pieces of metal that were also 4 bloodlines that were also 4 aspects of what he was, all of them resting. He thought about Dumbledore in the library on Thursday, reading his Muggle history with the absorbed focus of a man learning something he should have learned 60 years ago. He thought about Tom Riddle in a house in Wales, reading whatever he'd found to read, alive and powerless and ordinary, the longest journey in wizarding history ending in a quiet room with a book. He thought about Neville's father smiling. He thought about 47 names on a list, people coming home. He thought about what was left to do, and there was so much of it, The work was enormous and ongoing and would outlast him and would need to be picked up by people who weren't born yet and given to institutions that didn't exist yet, and he was 17 years old and had the rest of his life to do it. "What are you thinking about?" Luna asked. She'd put down the quibbler and was looking at him with those pale, clear eyes. "Everything," he said. "That's too much for one evening," she said. "You can think about everything tomorrow." "What should I think about tonight?" She considered this with genuine seriousness. "Then, the plants on the windowsill," she said. "Sirius has been very good to them. The one on the left is going to flower in about 3 weeks. He doesn't know yet. It'll surprise him." Harry looked at the plants. The one on the far left, the one he'd noticed months ago reaching toward the window, had small tight buds at the tips of its stems that he hadn't seen before. 3 weeks, he said. "Approximately," Luna said. Harry looked at the plant for a moment. Then he looked at the room, at all of it, everyone, the whole warm complicated living fact of it. "All right," he said. He picked up his tea. He drank it. He let the evening be what it was. Outside the flat window, Edinburgh was settling into its October night, the stars doing their cold and particular thing above the cloud cover, the city below lit and moving and fully, specifically alive. Somewhere in Yorkshire an empty estate held the echo of something ended. Somewhere in Wales a lamp burned in a small window. Somewhere in London a hospital room held 2 people relearning the sound of their son's name. And in a flat above a bookshop in Edinburgh, the boy who had ended a war was sitting in a leather armchair drinking tea, and the plants on the windowsill were quietly, without fuss, deciding to flower. The 4 rings on his right hand hummed their settled chord. The world, imperfect and ongoing and entirely itself, turned. End.